Hey guys, imagine waking up in ancient Babylon, the sun scorching your skin, the air thick with dust and the faint stench of sacrificial goats, only to realize you're a male virgin, and the priests have plans for you. Yeah, not the kind of plans involving a nice dinner and a scroll reading date. We're talking horrifying, gut-churning rituals that make modern horror movies look like children's bedtime stories. Welcome to the nightmare of Babylonian priestly antics, where survival is optional and irony is the only thing keeping you sane. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Picture this. You're a strapping young lad in Babylon, circa 1800 BCE, minding your own business, maybe trying to barter a few shekels for a decent clay pot, or dreaming of a life where you're not constantly dodging chariot traffic. Life's tough, sure, but you're managing. You've got your daily ration of barley gruel, a straw mat to sleep on, and the occasional flirtatious glance from the girl who sells figs at the market. But then, one fateful morning, you notice the neighbors whispering. They're pointing at you, their eyes wide with a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. You shrug it off. Babylonians are dramatic, right? Gossip spreads faster here than a plague of locusts. But then the priests show up. Oh, the priests. These aren't your friendly neighborhood holy men handing out blessings and date wine. These are the high priests of Marduk, draped in robes so heavy with gold thread they could sink a reed boat, their faces painted with kohl like they're auditioning for a divine beauty pageant. Their smiles are sharp, their voices honeyed, and their intentions? Let's just say they're not here to invite you to their book club. You, my friend, have been selected. For what, you ask? Well, that's the fun part. Nobody tells you, not yet. They just grab you, politely but firmly, like you're a lamb who wandered too far from the flock. Your protests? Ignored. Your questions? Met with cryptic chants about the will of the gods. As they drag you through the dusty streets, you notice the city's usual chaos. Merchants haggling, kids chasing stray dogs, scribes scribbling on clay tablets, grinds to a halt. Everyone's watching. Some look away, others stare with that sick fascination people get when they know something awful's about to happen. You're starting to sweat, and it's not just the Mesopotamian heat. The priests lead you to the ziggurat, that massive, stepped pyramid looming over Babylon like a judgmental uncle. It's the heart of the city, the hotline to the gods, and right now, it feels like the gates of the underworld. The air grows heavier as you climb the endless stairs, each step echoing with the weight of your impending doom. You're not sure what's worse, the fact that you're probably about to die, or that you're doing it on an empty stomach. Should have eaten that extra handful of barley this morning. At the top, you're greeted by a scene straight out of a fever dream. Braziers burn with pungent incense, filling the air with a sickly, sweet haze. Altars are strewn with offerings, flowers, bread, the occasional severed animal head. And there's a crowd of priests, their shaved heads gleaming in the torchlight, muttering prayers in a language that sounds like it was designed to give you a headache. You're stripped of your tunic, nobody asked your permission, by the way, and handed a scratchy linen kilt that smells suspiciously like it's been recycled from last week's ritual. The head priest, a man with eyes like a vulture and breath that could wilt a palm tree, steps forward. He's holding a bronze dagger, its blade etched with cuneiform that probably says something like, "Property of Marduk, please return if found." He starts chanting, and the other priests join in, their voices rising and falling like a swarm of angry bees. You catch a few words, something about purity, sacrifice, and the fertility of the land. Great. So you're not just a virgin, you're a symbolic virgin, because nothing screams, "Let's ensure a good harvest," like terrorizing a random guy who's never even kissed a girl. Now, let's pause for a second. You're probably thinking, okay, this sounds bad, but how much worse can it get? Oh, sweet summer child, Babylonians didn't mess around when it came to their gods. They believed the universe ran on a delicate balance of divine favor and human suffering, and guess who got to tip the scales? That's right, guys like you. The priests weren't just religious fanatics, they were the ultimate bureaucrats of cosmic misery, enforcing the gods' whims with a zeal that would make a tax collector blush. And male virgins? You were the gold standard of sacrificial pawns. Why? Because in their twisted logic, your untouched status made you a blank slate, a perfect vessel for divine wrath or blessing. Spoiler alert, it was usually wrath. Back to the ziggurat. The chanting reaches a fever pitch, and you're starting to feel like the main course at a divine barbecue. The head priest raises his dagger, and for one glorious moment you think, maybe this is just for show. Maybe they'll just nick my arm, call it a day, and send me home with a complimentary goat. Nope. The priests have other plans, and they involve a ritual so horrifying it's been scrubbed from most history books. Probably because even ancient scribes were like, yeah, let's not immortalize that one. They call it the cleansing of the pure, which sounds like a spa treatment, but is decidedly not. Step 1, they douse you in a mixture of river water, date syrup, and what you're pretty sure is goat blood. It's sticky, it's cold, and it attracts flies faster than a rotting fish. The priests claim it's to purify you, but you're starting to suspect they just enjoy watching you squirm. Step 2, they tie you to a wooden frame, your arms and legs spread like you're auditioning for a human kite. The ropes are rough, cutting into your skin, and the frame creaks ominously under your weight. You're facing the crowd now, and let me tell you, there's nothing more humiliating than being trussed up in a smelly kilt while 100 Babylonians gawk at you like you're the evening's entertainment. Step 3, and this is where it gets really fun, they bring out the sacred implements. These aren't your standard knives or pokers. Oh no, the Babylonians were creative. We're talking bronze tools shaped like mythical creatures, their edges serrated to maximize pain. One looks like a dragon's claw, another like the beak of some nightmare bird. The head priest waves them in front of your face, explaining, in excruciating detail, how each one will be used to commune with the gods. You don't catch all the details, partly because your brain is screaming, run, and partly because the incense is making you dizzy. But you hear enough to know this isn't going to end with a pat on the back and a thanks for participating. The ritual's purpose, as far as you can tell, is to extract your essence for the gods. What does that mean? Nobody's clear on that, not even the priests. Maybe it's your blood, maybe it's your screams, maybe it's some metaphysical mumbo-jumbo about your virgin soul. All you know is that it involves those tools, your body, and a whole lot of pain. The priests start circling you, their chants growing louder, their movements more frenzied. The crowd below is chanting too, caught up in the religious fervor. You catch a glimpse of your neighbor, the one who was whispering this morning. He's cheering. Cheering! You make a mental note to haunt him if you get the chance. The head priest steps closer, his dagger glinting in the firelight. He leans in, his breath hot against your ear, and whispers, "Fear not, for your suffering will please Marduk." Oh, fantastic. Nothing says "don't worry" like a creepy priest promising your agony will make a god happy. You're about to retort, something witty you're sure, but then the first tool makes contact and all you can do is scream. The pain is unlike anything you've ever felt, a white-hot explosion that radiates from your chest to your fingertips. The priests don't rush. They're methodical, precise, like they've done this 1,000 times before, and they probably have. You're not the first virgin to grace their altar, and you won't be the last. As the ritual drags on, your screams turn to whimpers, then to silence. You're not sure if you're still alive or if you've just gone numb. The priests don't seem to care. They're too busy collecting whatever it is they're harvesting. Blood, tears, dignity, who knows? The crowd is still watching, their faces a blur of awe and horror. You wonder if they'll tell stories about you, the brave, or maybe just unlucky, virgin who faced the god's wrath. Probably not. Babylonians have short memories when it comes to sacrificial victims. By now, you're barely conscious, your body a map of pain. The priests are wrapping up, their chants slowing, their tools clinking as they're set aside. You hear the head priest proclaim something about Marduk's favor and a bountiful harvest. The crowd roars its approval. You're untied, your body slumping to the stone floor. You're alive, barely, but the ritual isn't over. Oh no, the Babylonians love their encores. They drag you to the edge of the ziggurat, where the city sprawls below like a glittering, indifferent beast. The head priest raises his arms, declaring you marked by the gods. Marked for what? Nobody says. Maybe it's a badge of honor. Maybe it's a death sentence. All you know is that you're not the same person who climbed these stairs this morning. You're something else now. Something broken, something sacred, something cursed. As they lead you back down, you catch snippets of conversation from the crowd. Some call you blessed, others whisper about the next ritual, the next virgin. You want to laugh, to cry, to scream at the absurdity of it all. But you're too tired. All you can do is stumble forward, one foot in front of the other, into whatever nightmare Babylon has in store for you next. And trust me, this is just the beginning. So, you thought the ziggurat was the worst of it? Oh, you sweet, naive soul. Welcome back to Babylon, where the priests don't just stop at one horrifying ritual. They've got a whole menu of misery, and you, our unfortunate male virgin, are still the main dish. Yesterday's cleansing of the pure was just the appetizer, a warm-up for the gods' twisted sense of humor. Now, as the sun rises over the Euphrates, painting the sky a mocking shade of gold, you're about to discover that survival in this ancient hellscape comes with a side of existential dread and a sprinkle of cosmic irony. Let's dive into the next chapter of your Babylonian nightmare, where the priest's creativity for torment reaches new, absurd heights. You're not dead yet, but you're starting to wish you were. The morning after the ziggurat ordeal, you wake up, if you can call it waking, sprawled on a straw mat in a dimly lit temple chamber. Your body feels like it's been trampled by a herd of wild donkeys, every muscle screaming, your skin still sticky with the residue of yesterday's goat blood bath. You're alive, which is both a miracle and a curse. The priests didn't kill you, but they've left you marked, and not in the employee of the month kind of way. Your chest bears a fresh scar, a jagged cuneiform symbol that stings when you breathe. You don't know what it means, but the way the temple acolytes keep staring at it doesn't exactly scream, "Congratulations." You try to sit up, but a wave of dizziness sends you crashing back to the mat. Hunger gnaws at your stomach. Nobody's offered you food since the barley gruel 2 days ago, and you're starting to think the gods prefer their victims hangry. Just as you're contemplating whether temple dust is edible, the door creaks open. In walks a new priest, this one younger, with a beard so meticulously curled it looks like it took him 3 hours and a team of scribes to get it right. He's carrying a clay tablet and a stylus, and his expression is all business, like he's here to audit your suffering. "Rise, marked one," he says, his voice dripping with the kind of fake reverence you'd expect from a used chariot salesman. You want to tell him where he can shove his tablet, but your throat's too raw to form words. Besides, you're starting to learn that mouthing off to priests in Babylon is a one-way ticket to more pain. He explains in a tone that suggests he's reading from a script, that you've been chosen for the next phase of the god's grand plan. Apparently, surviving the ziggurat wasn't enough to appease Marduk's endless appetite for drama. Now, you're to participate in the Trial of the Unseen Flame, a name so ominously vague it could mean anything from a cozy bonfire to being roasted alive. Spoiler, it's not the bonfire. The priest leads you through a maze of temple corridors, each one lined with statues of snarling deities who look like they're judging your life choices. The air grows hotter, thicker as you descend deeper into the complex, until you're standing before a massive bronze door engraved with scenes of writhing demons and screaming mortals. Subtle, Babylon, real subtle. The door swings open, revealing a chamber that looks like it was designed by someone who really hates people. The floor is black basalt, polished to a mirror-like sheen, reflecting the flickering light of a dozen braziers. In the center of the room is a pit, and from it rises a column of heat so intense it warps the air. You can't see any flames, but the smell of charred something or other tells you this is no place for a casual stroll. The priest hands you a linen sack filled with what feels like rocks and tells you to offer them to the unseen flame. You peek inside. Yep, rocks. But not just any rocks. These are carved with tiny, intricate symbols, and they're warm to the touch, like they've been sitting too close to a fire. You're about to ask what the deal is, but the priest shoves you forward, and suddenly you're standing at the edge of the pit, the heat searing your face. The crowd from yesterday is back, because apparently Babylonians have nothing better to do than watch you suffer. They're chanting again, their voices a low, rhythmic drone that makes your skin crawl. The priest explains the rules, and oh boy, they're a masterpiece of sadistic nonsense. You're to throw the rocks into the pit, one by one, while reciting a prayer to Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, who, let's be honest, seems like she could use a therapy session or two. If you drop a rock, mispronounce a word, or, gods forbid, hesitate, the priest will assist you. You don't know what assist means, but the way the priest's eyes glint when he says it suggests it's not a friendly pat on the back. You start tossing the rocks, your hands trembling as you try to remember the prayer. The words are in Akkadian, a language you barely understand, and the heat from the pit is making your brain feel like it's melting. The first rock lands in the pit with a dull thud, and the crowd murmurs approvingly. You're doing great until you fumble the second rock. It slips from your sweaty fingers, rolling toward the edge of the pit but not quite making it in. The crowd gasps. The priest's smile vanishes. Before you can blink, two acolytes grab you, their grip like iron, and drag you to a stone slab on the other side of the chamber. You're strapped down, again, because apparently Babylonians have a thing for tying people up. The priest looms over you, holding a bronze rod that's glowing red hot. The flame demands precision, he says, like you're supposed to nod and say, "Oh, totally, my bad." Instead, you scream as the rod touches your arm, the pain so sharp it feels like your soul's trying to escape your body. The crowd cheers. Of course they do. They're eating this up like it's the season finale of their favorite cuneiform soap opera. You manage to finish the ritual, barely, your voice hoarse from reciting prayers and screaming in equal measure. The last rock lands in the pit, and the priests declare the flame satisfied. You're not sure what that means, but you're too exhausted to care. They unstrap you, and you collapse to the floor, your arm throbbing where the rod left its mark. You're starting to collect scars like some people collect pottery, but the priests aren't done with you yet. Oh no, they've got a flair for the dramatic, and you're their star performer. They lead you to a new chamber, this one smaller, with walls covered in cuneiform inscriptions that look like they're mocking you. In the center is a stone basin filled with a dark, viscous liquid that smells like death and regret. The priest dips his fingers in it and starts painting symbols on your face, chest, and legs. It's cold, it's slimy, and you're pretty sure it's not just paint. "This is the anointing of the bound," he says, like that explains anything. You're starting to think the priests make up these names on the spot just to sound ominous. The anointing, it turns out, is preparation for the next ritual, because why have one horrifying ceremony when you can have two? They call it the binding of the spirit, and it's every bit as delightful as it sounds. You're led to a platform overlooking a courtyard where a crowd of Babylonians has gathered, again. Do these people ever work? The platform is rigged with ropes and pulleys, and before you know it, you're hoisted into the air, dangling like a human piñata. The ropes are tied in such a way that every movement sends a fresh wave of pain through your already battered body. The priest below starts chanting about binding your spirit to the gods, which sounds poetic until you realize it involves more of those cursed bronze tools. This time, they're not cutting you, they're branding you. Tiny, intricate symbols are seared into your skin, each one a prayer to a different deity. You lose count after the fifth, your mind a haze of pain and exhaustion. The crowd is eating it up, chanting along with the priest, their voices rising to a fever pitch. You're starting to hate these people, like, really hate them. The ritual ends with you being lowered to the ground, your body a canvas of burns and scars. The priest declares you bound to the divine, which you're pretty sure is just a fancy way of saying you're screwed. They don't kill you, though. That would be too easy. Instead, they send you back to the temple chamber, where you're given a bowl of watery gruel and told to rest for the next trial. Rest? In this place? You'd have better luck sleeping on a bed of scorpions. As you lie there, staring at the flickering oil lamp, you can't help but laugh, a bitter, broken sound. This is Babylon, where the gods demand your suffering, the priests deliver it with a smile, and the crowd cheers like it's a sporting event. You're not just a virgin anymore. You're a walking testament to the absurdity of human survival. And the worst part? You know there's more to come. The priests are already whispering about the next ritual, something about a journey to the shadow. You don't know what it means, but you're sure it's going to be awful. Because in Babylon, pain isn't just a punishment, it's a lifestyle. Stay tuned, because this nightmare's far from over. Here you are, back in the suffocating embrace of Babylon, where the air smells of despair and the priests seem to have an endless supply of ways to make your life a living nightmare. You're still a male virgin. Congratulations on that, by the way, it's really working out for you. And the gods apparently have a group chat where they're brainstorming new ways to torment you. The scars from the cleansing of the pure and the binding of the spirit are still fresh, your body a roadmap of pain, and yet here you are, staggering into day 3 of this Mesopotamian horror show. The priests are calling this one the journey to the shadow. And if that sounds like a bad road trip, you're not wrong. Buckle up, because Babylon's about to crank the absurdity and agony up to 11. You're roused from your pathetic excuse for sleep, curled up on that same straw mat, now smelling like a mix of sweat, blood, and whatever that slimy anointing goo was, by a new priest. This one's old, his face so wrinkled it looks like a crumpled clay tablet, and his eyes have the glassy stare of someone who's seen too many rituals and not enough sunlight. He's carrying a staff topped with a creepy little statue of a scorpion man, because apparently Babylonians can't just use a normal stick. "Come, marked one," he croaks, his voice like gravel underfoot. You're starting to hate that nickname. Marked one? More like punching bag of the gods. You stumble to your feet, every joint protesting, and follow him because, well, what else are you gonna do? Run? You tried that yesterday, and let's just say the temple guards have a mean right hook. The priest leads you through yet another maze of corridors, this one darker and damper than the last, the walls slick with something you don't want to think about. The air grows colder, the light dimmer, until you're standing before a low, arched doorway that looks like it leads straight to the underworld. And, surprise, it kind of does. The priest pushes you through, and you find yourself in a cavernous chamber, the ceiling lost in shadows, the floor littered with bones. Bones! You're no expert, but they don't look like they came from goats. The priest doesn't seem fazed, which is honestly more terrifying than the bones themselves. He gestures to a narrow stone bridge stretching across a chasm in the center of the room. Below, there's nothing but darkness, but you swear you hear whispers, low, guttural sounds that make your skin prickle. The journey to the shadow, it turns out, is a literal journey. You're supposed to cross that bridge, alone, carrying nothing but a small clay lamp filled with oil that smells suspiciously like it's been used before. The priest hands you the lamp, its flame flickering like it's as scared as you are, and tells you to walk. The shadow awaits, he says, with the kind of gravitas that suggests he's been practicing this line in front of a mirror. You ask what the shadow is, because at this point, you're desperate for any information that might keep you alive. He just smiles, his teeth yellowed and crooked, and says, "You'll know it when you see it." Super helpful, thanks. You take your first step onto the bridge, and it's every bit as terrifying as it looks. The stone is uneven, slick with moisture, and the chasm below seems to hum with malevolent energy. The lamp's flame casts wild shadows on the walls, turning every crack into a snarling face. You're halfway across when you hear it, a low, rumbling growl that makes your stomach drop. You freeze, because moving feels like a bad idea, but so does standing still. The growl grows louder, and now you're sure it's not just your imagination. Something's down there, in the darkness, and it's not happy to see you. You glance back, hoping the priest will call this whole thing off, but he's just standing there, watching, his staff tapping rhythmically against the floor. The crowd's back too, because of course they are. They've set up shop at the edge of the chamber, whispering and pointing like they're at a gladiator match. You're starting to think Babylonians invented reality TV. You force yourself to keep moving, one shaky step at a time, the lamp trembling in your hands. The bridge narrows, and you're pretty sure it's doing it on purpose, just to mess with you. The growling stops, replaced by an eerie silence that's somehow worse. You're almost at the other side when the lamp flickers out. Just like that. No wind, no warning, just darkness. You're alone, blind, on a bridge over a chasm that's probably home to something with too many teeth. You hear the priest shout something about facing the shadow, but you're too busy trying not to fall to your death to care. You inch forward, feeling your way with your feet, your heart pounding so hard you're sure the gods can hear it. Then you see it, or rather, you feel it. The shadow. It's not a thing, not exactly. It's more like a presence, a cold, suffocating weight that presses against your chest, your mind, your soul. It whispers things, horrible things about your fears, your failures, the fact that you'll probably never taste that fig seller's fruit again. You want to scream, but your voice is gone, swallowed by the darkness. You stumble forward, desperate to reach the other side, and somehow, miraculously, you do. Your feet hit solid ground, and the shadow's presence fades, leaving you gasping, trembling, and very much alive. But don't get too comfortable, because the priests are just getting started. You're led to another chamber, this one smaller, with a low ceiling and walls painted with scenes of skeletal figures dancing under a blood-red moon. A new priest awaits, this one with a shaved head and a necklace of what you really hope are just beads and not tiny skulls. He's holding a clay bowl filled with a thick, black paste that smells like tar and regret. "Drink," he says, shoving the bowl under your nose. You hesitate, because you're not an idiot, but the priest's glare makes it clear this isn't optional. You take a sip, and it's every bit as awful as you expected, like swallowing a mixture of mud and despair. Your vision blurs, your head spins, and suddenly you're not in the chamber anymore. You're somewhere else, somewhere worse. It's a dreamscape, or maybe a hallucination, courtesy of whatever was in that bowl. You're standing in a barren wasteland, the sky above you churning with storm clouds that look like they're screaming. Shadowy figures surround you, their faces blank, their hands reaching for you. They're chanting, but it's not Akkadian, it's something older, something that makes your bones ache. You try to run, but your legs are heavy, like you're wading through quicksand. The figures close in, their fingers brushing your skin, and you realize they're not just shadows. They're the ghosts of everyone who stood where you're standing, everyone who's faced the priest's rituals and didn't make it out. You scream, or you think you do, but the sound is swallowed by the storm. You wake up, maybe, back in the chamber, the priest staring down at you with a look that says he's seen this 100 times. "You've met the shadow," he says, like you just had a pleasant chat over tea. You're shaking, sweating, your mouth tasting like you licked a tomb. The crowd's still there, because apparently they've got nothing better to do than watch you lose your mind. The priest declares the ritual complete, but not before adding one final touch, a tattoo inked with a needle that looks like it was designed to hurt. It's another cuneiform symbol, this one on your forearm, and it burns like a fresh brand. You're starting to look like a walking temple inscription. They drag you back to your chamber, and leave you with another bowl of gruel and a cryptic warning about the final trial. You're too exhausted to eat, too broken to care. The shadow's whispers still echo in your head, telling you you're doomed, that the gods are laughing, that Babylon will chew you up and spit you out. And the worst part? They're probably right. You lie there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how you're still alive. The pain, the fear, the absurdity of it all. It's almost funny, in a twisted, cosmic kind of way. You're not just surviving Babylon, you're enduring it, one horrifying ritual at a time. But the priests aren't done. Oh no, they've got one more trick up their gold-threaded sleeves, and it's going to make the shadow look like a pleasant afternoon nap. Get ready, because the final act is coming, and it's going to be a doozy. Welcome to the grand finale of your Babylonian nightmare, where the priests have saved their most unhinged, over-the-top performance for last. You're still here, somehow, a male virgin turned human pincushion, your body a canvas of scars, burns, and tattoos that scream, "I survived Babylon, and all I got was this lousy trauma." The journey to the shadow left you questioning your sanity, but the priests aren't done with you yet. Oh no, they've got one final ritual up their gold-threaded sleeves, and it's called the Offering of the Eternal Vessel. Sounds fancy, right? Spoiler, it's not. It's the kind of thing that makes you wonder if the gods are just bored immortals playing a cosmic prank on you. So, grab your metaphorical popcorn, because even you, battered and broken, can't look away from the sheer absurdity of what's coming next. You're dragged from your cell, that damp, straw-strewn nightmare you've come to call home, by a priest who looks like he's been mainlining incense fumes for decades. His eyes are bloodshot, his robe is stained with what you hope is just wine, and he's muttering about the final appeasement like it's the title of a bad epic poem. Your body protests every step, your legs wobble, your arms ache, and your head feels like it's hosting a Babylonian drum festival. You're led through the temple, past the usual parade of snarling statues and flickering braziers, to a massive courtyard open to the sky. The sun is high, blinding, and the heat is so oppressive it feels like the gods are personally trying to roast you. The courtyard is packed with people, hundreds of them, more than you've seen in any of the previous rituals. They're not just the usual gawkers. There are nobles in glittering robes, merchants clutching their wares, even kids who should probably be somewhere else, like not watching a grown man get ritually tortured. The crowd parts as you march forward, revealing a massive stone altar in the center, carved with scenes of gods devouring mortals. Subtlety, as always, is not Babylon's strong suit. The altar is surrounded by 4 towering statues of deities, Marduk, Ishtar, Shamash, and some creepy snake-headed thing you don't recognize, but are pretty sure doesn't like you. Each statue holds a bronze basin filled with something that smells like death's armpit. The head priest, the same vulture-eyed creep from day one, steps forward, his dagger now joined by a scepter that looks like it was forged in a nightmare factory. He raises his arms, silencing the crowd, and starts droning on about the eternal vessel, and how your sacrifice, yes, he said sacrifice, and no, that's not a good sign, will ensure Babylon's prosperity for another year. You're starting to think these people could just plant more crops and call it a day, but no. Apparently your suffering is the key to a good harvest. The priests strip you down, again, because apparently modesty is a sin in Babylon, and drape you in a robe so thin it's basically a suggestion of clothing. They tie you to the altar, your arms and legs splayed out like you're a human starfish, the ropes biting into your already raw skin. The crowd starts chanting, a low, rhythmic hum that makes your teeth ache. The priest leans in, his breath still reeking of whatever he ate in 1800 BCE, and whispers, "Your essence will join the eternal." You're about to ask what that means, but then you see the tools. Oh, the tools. They've brought out the big guns this time. Bronze blades, hooked needles, and something that looks like a cross between a ladle and a torture device. The priest starts the ritual by pouring the contents of one of the basins over you. It's not water, not oil, but something thick and warm that smells like iron and despair. You're pretty sure it's blood, and not the goat kind. Your stomach churns, but you're too weak to vomit. The crowd cheers, because of course they do. They're basically professional sadists at this point. The priest begins carving symbols into your skin, each cut precise, deliberate, like he's writing a love letter to the gods with your blood. You scream, because what else can you do? The pain is a white-hot symphony, drowning out everything else. The crowd's chants grow louder, the priest's movements more frenzied. They're not just cutting you now, they're collecting the blood in small clay vials, passing them around like party favors. You catch snippets of their prayers, something about binding your soul to the city, making you a vessel for the god's will. You're starting to think vessel is just a fancy word for doomed. The ritual drags on, each moment stretching into eternity. They burn herbs that make your head spin, chant in languages that sound like they were invented to scare children, and occasionally splash you with more of that mystery liquid. You're fading, your vision blurring, your body no longer feeling like it belongs to you. The crowd's faces blend into a sea of eyes, all watching, all waiting for the grand finale. And then it comes. The priest raises a massive bronze bowl, its rim etched with cuneiform, and pours its contents over the altar. It's not blood this time. It's something worse, something that burns where it touches, eating into your skin like liquid fire. You scream until your voice gives out, your body convulsing against the ropes. The priest declares you offered, and the crowd erupts, their cheers so loud they shake the ground. You're not sure if you're dead or alive, but you're leaning toward dead. The world goes dark, and for one blissful moment, you think it's over. But this is Babylon, where even death is just another plot twist. You wake up, because of course you do, in a different chamber, this one small and quiet, with walls painted in soothing blues and greens. A young acolyte, barely old enough to grow a beard, is tending to your wounds, smearing some kind of salve that smells like herbs and hope. You're alive somehow, your body a patchwork of pain but still functioning. The acolyte doesn't meet your eyes, just mutters something about the gods being pleased. You want to laugh, to cry, to ask why the gods couldn't be pleased with a nice fruit basket instead, but you're too weak to speak. The head priest enters, his face softer now, almost human. He tells you the ritual is complete, that you've served Babylon well, that you're forever bound to the city. You're free to go, he says, but you're marked now, a living relic of the gods' favor, or their cruelty, depending on how you look at it. You stumble out of the temple, the sunlight blinding, the city buzzing with its usual chaos. People stare as you pass, some with awe, some with pity, most with that same morbid curiosity you've come to hate. You're not the same person who was dragged to the ziggurat 4 days ago. You're something else now, a survivor, a sacrifice, a story whispered in the markets. You find your way back to your old life, or what's left of it. The fig seller avoids your gaze, your neighbors keep their distance, and the scars on your body ache every time it rains. You're alive, but you're haunted by the priests, the gods, the crowd, the sheer absurdity of it all. Babylon doesn't just break you, it remakes you into something that can never quite escape its shadow. And as you sit on your straw mat, eating your first real meal in days, you can't help but wonder, was it worth it? Did your suffering really appease the gods, or were they just laughing the whole time? One thing's for sure, Babylon's priests are the real winners here, turning pain into power, fear into faith, and one unlucky virgin into a legend nobody will ever forget. So, here's to you, marked one. You survived the unsurvivable, endured the unendurable, and came out the other side with a story that's equal parts horror, absurdity, and dark, twisted comedy. Babylon's still standing, its gods still demanding, its priests still scheming. But you're still here, and that's the biggest middle finger you can give to the gods. Hey guys, imagine waking up in ancient Rome, the eternal city, where the wine flows, the Colosseum roars, and the emperors. Oh, they're cooking up horrors so wild they make your worst nightmares look like a sunny picnic. We're not talking about boring tax reforms or bad urban planning here. These are the Roman emperors, the OG megalomaniacs who turned cruelty into an art form and insanity into a lifestyle. From setting people on fire for giggles to hosting dinner parties where the main course is betrayal, these guys wrote the book on unhinged power trips. So, buckle up for a journey into the dark, absurd, and downright terrifying world of Rome's most deranged rulers. It's going to be a bloody ride. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Picture yourself in Rome, around 37 CE, just a regular pleb trying to scrape by. You're dodging chariot traffic, haggling for a loaf of bread that's probably half sawdust, and hoping the local aqueduct doesn't spring a leak and flood your one-room insula. Life's tough, but you're managing, until you hear the name Caligula. Yeah, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, or as his buddies call him, Little Boots. Sounds cute, right? Wrong. This guy's about to turn your life into a circus of nightmares, and not the fun kind with acrobats. Caligula's only been emperor for a few months, and already the city's buzzing with stories. One day he's declaring himself a god, the next he's making his horse a senator. Quirky, you think, maybe even charming, until you're dragged to one of his infamous parties. You're not here for the wine or the roasted peacock. No, you're the entertainment. Caligula's got a thing for spectacle, and by spectacle, I mean watching people squirm. You're shoved into a gilded banquet hall, the air thick with perfume and fear, where Rome's elite are lounging on couches, pretending they're not terrified. Caligula's sprawled at the head of the table, his eyes glinting like a cat toying with a mouse. He's wearing a silk tunic that probably costs more than your entire neighborhood, and he's grinning in a way that says someone's about to have a very bad day. The rumor is he's been feeling divinely inspired lately, which is code for he's about to do something horrifying. You're handed a goblet of wine, and you're thinking, okay, maybe this isn't so bad. Then you notice the guy next to you, a senator who made the mistake of sneezing during Caligula's speech, is now missing a few fingers. The emperor's guards, hulking brutes with swords sharper than Roman wit, are circling the room, and you realize this isn't a party. It's a trap. Caligula stands, raising his goblet, and declares tonight's theme, loyalty. Sounds nice until you see the slaves dragging in a cage full of snarling wolves. Apparently, loyalty means proving you're willing to die for your emperor, and Caligula's idea of a loyalty test involves you wrestling a wolf while the crowd bets on how long you'll last. You're not a gladiator, you're just a guy who wanted to buy some bread, but here you are, armed with nothing but a dull knife and your rapidly fading will to live. The crowd cheers as the cage opens, and you're pretty sure your life expectancy just dropped to about 3 minutes. Miraculously, you survive, barely, your tunic shredded, your arm bleeding, and your dignity long gone. Caligula claps, delighted, and declares you worthy. Worthy of what? Nobody knows, but you're not sticking around to find out. You limp home, vowing to never attend another imperial party, but in Rome, avoiding the emperor's whims is like trying to dodge rain in a storm. Caligula's just getting started. A few weeks later, you're minding your own business when you hear about his latest stunt. He's decided to bridge the Bay of Baiae with a floating pontoon bridge, just because he can. Why? Some say it's to mock a prophecy that he'd no more become emperor than ride a horse across the sea. So, naturally, he forces thousands of slaves, soldiers, and random citizens, you included, to build this ridiculous bridge, using every boat in the region. You're out there, sweating under the Mediterranean sun, tying boats together while Caligula prances around in a golden chariot, shouting about his divine greatness. The bridge is a disaster. Boats sink, people drown, and you're pretty sure you've got splinters in places splinters shouldn't be. But Caligula rides across it, declares victory over Neptune, and throws a week-long party where half the guests don't make it out alive. You're starting to see a pattern. Caligula's idea of fun usually ends with someone bleeding. But Caligula's not the only emperor with a flair for the horrific. Fast forward a few decades and you're under Nero's rule, around 64 CE. Nero's got a reputation as an artist, a poet, a guy who loves the spotlight. Sounds harmless, right? Wrong again. This guy's got a creative streak that makes Caligula look like an amateur. You're walking home one night when you see an orange glow on the horizon. Rome's burning, the great fire tearing through the city like a divine tantrum. People are screaming, houses collapsing, and you're running through streets choked with smoke, trying to save your measly belongings. The fire rages for days, and when it finally dies down, half the city's gone. Rumors swirl that Nero started it himself, either to clear space for his new palace or because he wanted to write an epic poem about a burning city. Either way, he's not exactly handing out blankets to the survivors. Instead, he needs a scapegoat, and guess who he picks? The Christians, a small, weirdly optimistic sect who keep talking about love and salvation. You're not even Christian, but you live next to one, so you're rounded up with the rest. Nero's got a twisted imagination, and his punishment for the arsonists is straight out of a horror story. You're dragged to his private gardens, where the emperor's hosting a little light show. Christians, and anyone unlucky enough to be associated with them, are tied to poles doused in pitch and set on fire to light up the night. You're spared the flames, but you're forced to watch, the screams echoing in your ears as Nero strolls by, strumming his lyre and critiquing the aesthetics of the scene. You want to vomit, but fear keeps your stomach in check. The crowd, because Rome always has a crowd, is a mix of horrified and enthralled, because nothing says Roman entertainment like public executions with a side of imperial poetry. You escape the gardens, but Nero's not done leaving his mark. He's obsessed with his legacy, and that means building the Domus Aurea, a golden palace so extravagant it makes Caligula's pontoon bridge look like a budget project. You're conscripted to work on it, hauling marble and gold leaf while Nero wanders through, suggesting tweaks like a deranged interior decorator. The taxes to fund this monstrosity are crushing, and you're barely eating, but Nero's too busy practicing his chariot racing to care. One day, you overhear a senator muttering about rebellion, and you think, finally, someone's going to stop this lunatic. But Nero's got ears everywhere, and the senator's soon starring in his own execution, his family sold into slavery. You keep your head down, because in Nero's Rome, survival means staying invisible. Yet even invisibility isn't enough when the emperor's in a mood. You're summoned to one of his performances. Yes, Nero fancies himself a rock star, and attendance is mandatory. You're packed into a theater, the air thick with the smell of sweat and fear, as Nero takes the stage, belting out a tragic ode that lasts 3 hours. You clap until your hands bleed, because the guy next to you who stopped early is now being dragged out by the Praetorian Guard. Rome's emperors don't just rule, they terrorize, they perform, they make you wish you'd been born in a quiet village somewhere far, far away. And this is just the warm-up. Caligula and Nero are the headliners, but Rome's got a whole roster of emperors ready to crank the horror to new heights. Stay tuned, because the blood's just starting to flow. So, you thought Caligula and Nero were the peak of Roman crazy? Oh, you're in for a treat, because the Eternal City's emperor roster is like a never-ending horror show, and we're just getting to the really unhinged acts. You're still a poor pleb in Rome, your nerves shredded from dodging Caligula's wolf parties and Nero's human torches, but the gods aren't done laughing at you yet. The empire's churning through rulers like a gladiator arena through fresh meat, and each one seems determined to outdo the last in sheer, jaw-dropping awfulness. Welcome to part 2 of our blood-soaked stroll through Rome's imperial nightmares, where power, paranoia, and a complete lack of chill turn the city into a circus of terror. Let's dive back in, because survival in Rome means keeping your head, literally and figuratively. It's around 69 CE, the year of the 4 emperors, and Rome's a mess. Nero's dead, thank the gods, but the power vacuums turned the city into a free-for-all. You're just trying to sell some olives in the market when you hear about Galba, the first guy to grab the throne. He's old, cranky, and looks like he's been sucking lemons since the Republic fell. You think, maybe he'll be boring, just tax us and leave us alone. Nope. Galba's got a talent for making enemies, and his idea of fiscal reform is squeezing every sestertius out of Rome's citizens like he's wringing a wet tunic. You're forced to hand over half your olive profits to his tax collectors, who act like they're doing you a favor by not taking your sandals too. But Galba's reign is short. Spoiler, he gets betrayed and beheaded in the Forum, because that's just Tuesday in Rome. Next up is Otho, who lasts about 3 months. He's vain, wears a wig to hide his baldness, and spends more time primping than ruling. You're dragged into a short-lived chaos when he decides to win the people's love by hosting a massive public feast. Sounds nice until you realize the food's been generously donated from the city's granaries, leaving you with nothing to eat next week. The feast turns into a riot when the wine runs dry, and you barely escape with your life, ducking behind a statue of Jupiter as Otho's guards start cracking skulls. Otho's soon out, replaced by Vitellius, a glutton who makes Nero look like a health nut. You're conscripted to serve at one of his banquets, hauling platters of peacock tongues and flamingo brains while Vitellius lounges, burping and demanding more. The guy eats so much you're pretty sure he's bankrupting the empire one course at a time. But his real horror show starts when he gets paranoid. You're in the wrong place at the wrong time when he accuses a random senator of treason. The poor guy's dragged to the banquet, forced to eat poisoned dormice, and dies choking while Vitellius toasts his loyalty. You're stuck cleaning up the mess, praying you don't accidentally look at the emperor funny and end up as dessert. Vitellius gets overthrown by Vespasian, who's at least semi-sane, but the damage is done. You're starting to think Rome's cursed. Fast forward to 81 CE, and you're under Domitian, Vespasian's son, who's got a chip on his shoulder and a love for control that'd make a centurion blush. Domitian's the kind of guy who'd micromanage a toga party, and his reign feels like living under a giant paranoid eye. You're a baker now, kneading dough in a cramped shop, when you hear about his latest obsession, rooting out disloyalty. Domitian's got spies everywhere. Your neighbor, the guy selling fish, even the stray dogs seem to be reporting to him. You accidentally mutter something about the emperor's new statue looking a bit tacky, and next thing you know, you're hauled before the Praetorian Guard. Domitian's holding court in his palace, surrounded by black marble walls he insists reflect traitors' faces. He's got a creepy habit of staring into them, muttering to himself, and you're pretty sure he's not admiring his reflection. You're accused of seditious speech, which is Roman for, you said something we didn't like. Your punishment? You're sent to the arena, not to fight, but to be part of Domitian's historical reenactments. He loves staging epic battles, except the losers are real people, and the blood is definitely not fake. You're dressed as a Dacian warrior, given a blunt spear, and told to die heroically for the crowd's amusement. The lions are real, the gladiators are pissed, and you're just a baker who wanted to make a few loaves. You survive by sheer dumb luck, hiding behind a fallen prop while the crowd roars for more. Domitian declares the show a success, but you're left with nightmares and a limp that'll never heal. Domitian's not just about public spectacles, though. He's got a private side that's even creepier. You're summoned to his villa one night because apparently bakers are now on call for imperial whims. The villa's a labyrinth of dark corridors and statues that seem to watch you. Domitian's hosting a black banquet where everything, food, plates, even the slaves, is painted black to mimic a funeral. The guests, all senators he suspects of plotting, are terrified, eating what they hope is just dyed chicken while Domitian talks about death like it's his favorite hobby. You're serving wine, trying not to spill it, when he points at you and asks, "Would you die for me?" You nod, because saying no means instant execution, but your knees are shaking. He laughs, dismisses you, and you hear later that half the guests didn't make it home. Domitian's paranoia means nobody's safe. Not senators, not slaves, not even you, the guy just trying to bake some bread. But the horror doesn't stop with Domitian. Jump to 180 CE and you're under Commodus, the guy who makes you miss Domitian's creepy dinner parties. Commodus fancies himself a gladiator, except he's the emperor, so nobody's allowed to tell him he's terrible at it. You're a street cleaner now, sweeping up after chariot races when you're forced to attend one of his arena performances. Commodus strides in, dressed as Hercules, complete with a lion skin and club, ready to fight hand-picked opponents who are basically doomed to lose. You're in the stands, squashed between a drunk butcher and a screaming kid, watching as Commodus slaughters crippled veterans and chained prisoners, calling it heroism. The crowd cheers because disagreeing means joining the body pile. But Commodus doesn't stop at the arena. He's got a thing for renaming everything after himself. Rome's now Colonia Commodiana, and you're pretty sure he's planning to rename the sun next. You're conscripted to help build a massive statue of him as Hercules, hauling stones while he poses for the sculptors, flexing like he's auditioning for a myth. The taxes to fund his ego are starving the city, and you're eating boiled leather to survive. One day, you accidentally knock over a brick, and Commodus, in a fit of divine rage, orders you flogged in front of the statue. You're left bleeding in the dust, wondering if Jupiter's taking bets on how much worse this can get. Commodus's reign is a fever dream of vanity and violence, and you're just trying to stay alive long enough to see him fall. Spoiler, he does, but not before turning Rome into his personal playground of pain. You're starting to lose track of the emperors, each one a new flavor of awful. Rome's not just a city, it's a stage for these lunatics to act out their darkest impulses, and you're the unwilling audience. The horrors keep piling up, and you're wondering if you'll ever catch a break. But the empire's got more in store, and the next batch of emperors is ready to crank the dial on depravity. Stay tuned, because this Roman nightmare is far from over. Alright, you're still here, trudging through the blood-soaked streets of Rome, where every emperor seems to have a PhD in creative cruelty and a side hustle in making your life miserable. You've survived Caligula's wolf wrestling parties, Nero's fiery light shows, and the chaotic speedrun of the Year of the Four Emperors. Not to mention Domitian's paranoia-fueled black banquets and Commodus's gladiator cosplay gone wrong. You're a pleb with the survival instincts of a cockroach, but Rome's not done with you yet. The imperial hit parade keeps rolling, and the next batch of emperors is ready to dial up the horror with a mix of sadism, absurdity, and just plain bad vibes. Welcome to part 3 of our grim tour through the Eternal City's darkest days, where every sunrise feels like a personal insult. Let's dive back into the madness, because in Rome, the only thing more eternal than the city is the suffering. It's 193 CE, and you're still scraping by, now a cobbler patching sandals for soldiers who'd rather stab you than pay you. The empire's in another tailspin thanks to the death of Commodus, who finally got strangled in his bath. Good riddance, but it's not like things are getting better. Enter Didius Julianus, the guy who literally bought the throne at an auction, because apparently Rome's now eBay for emperors. You're in the Forum when you hear the news. The Praetorian Guard, those charming folks who moonlight as kingmakers, sold the empire to the highest bidder. Didius, a rich nobody with more money than sense, paid a fortune to wear the purple, and you're thinking, great, maybe he'll be too busy counting his coins to torment us. Wrong. Didius is desperate to prove he's legit, and his idea of legitimacy is throwing lavish spectacles to distract from the fact that everyone hates him. You're dragged into one of these, a festival of unity in the Colosseum, where the unity part involves watching condemned prisoners, traitors, get torn apart by bears while Didius waves from his gilded box, pretending he's beloved. You're there to sweep up the blood-soaked sand afterward, because even cobblers get conscripted for cleanup duty. The crowd's cheering, but you can tell they're just waiting for the next guy to take the throne. Didius lasts 66 days before he's executed, and you're not exactly crying over his corpse. Next up is Septimius Severus, who's less about spectacle and more about straight-up terror. You're still cobbling, but now you're fixing boots for his army as he marches into Rome to restore order. Severus doesn't mess around. He's got a hit list longer than the Appian Way, and he's not afraid to use it. You're minding your own business, stitching a sandal when his soldiers storm your neighborhood, rounding up anyone who ever looked at Commodus or Didius the wrong way. Your neighbor, a chatty baker, gets dragged off for disloyalty because he once sold a stale loaf to a Praetorian. You're forced to watch as he's crucified along the Via Sacra, his screams mingling with the city's usual din of chariot wheels and hawkers. Severus's purge is relentless. Senators, merchants, even random plebs like you are fair game if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. You keep your head down, but every creak of your door makes you jump, wondering if it's the soldiers coming for you. Severus doesn't just stop at executions. He's got a knack for psychological warfare. He orders statues of his enemies' heads impaled on spikes around the city. A lovely reminder that dissent equals death. You pass one every day on your way to the market, its empty eyes staring like they're judging your shoddy stitchwork. Fast forward to 211 CE and Severus is gone, leaving his sons Caracalla and Geta to co-rule. Spoiler, sharing isn't their thing. You're now a water carrier, hauling buckets from the aqueducts to keep Rome's baths running, because apparently the empire needs clean citizens to watch its dirty deeds. Caracalla and Geta hate each other, and their sibling rivalry isn't the cute kind. It's the murder your brother in your mom's arms kind. You're delivering water to the palace when you hear the screams. Caracalla's had Geta hacked to death right in front of their mother, because nothing says I'm the boss like fratricide. You're stuck mopping up the blood because even water carriers get roped into the aftermath. Caracalla doesn't stop there. He's paranoid, volatile, and has a body count to match. To honor his brother's memory, or more likely to cover his tracks, he orders a massacre of Geta's supporters. You're in the wrong tavern one night when his soldiers burst in, slaughtering anyone who ever smiled at Geta. You dive under a table, praying your water jug doesn't give you away, as the screams and clanging swords fill the air. Thousands die, some say 20,000, and you're lucky to crawl out alive, your tunic stained with someone else's blood. Caracalla's reign is a masterclass in terror. He loves the military, so he hikes taxes to pay his soldiers, leaving you eating moldy bread to survive. You're hauling water one day when you hear about his latest decree, the Constitutio Antoniniana, which grants citizenship to all free men in the empire. Sounds nice until you realize it's just a trick to tax everyone even more. You're a citizen now, congratulations, but you're also broke and terrified. Caracalla's got a habit of wandering the streets in disguise, looking for trouble. You bump into a cloaked figure one night, mutter an apology, and only later hear he was the emperor himself, and the guy who bumped into him after you didn't make it home. You start sleeping with one eye open, because Caracalla's Rome is a city where even a water carrier can end up on the wrong side of a sword, but Caracalla's not the end of the line. Skip to 218 CE and you're under Elagabalus, a teenage emperor who makes Caligula look like a model of restraint. You're a street vendor now, selling dubious meat skewers to drunk revelers, because Rome's economy is a mess and you take what jobs you can get. Elagabalus is obsessed with the sun god Elagabal, and he's decided Rome needs to worship his deity too. You're forced to attend one of his religious festivals, where he's dancing in a gold-spangled robe, tossing sacred stones into the crowd like they're party favors. The stones are heavy, and you see a guy next to you get knocked out cold. The festival turns weirder when Elagabalus starts sacrificing animals, and sometimes people, in the name of his god. You're stuck cleaning up the mess, dodging pools of blood and trying not to gag as the priests chant about divine radiance. Elagabalus's antics don't stop at religion. He's got a thing for shocking the city, like marrying a Vestal virgin, big no-no in Rome, and hosting orgies that make Nero's parties look like book clubs. You're delivering skewers to one of these, and it's a nightmare of wine, screams, and things you can't unsee. Elagabalus, ever the showman, decides to gift the city with a lottery, except the prizes include things like a box of bees or a dead slave. You win a basket of snakes, because of course you do, and spend the night praying they don't escape. The kid's reign is a fever dream of excess and cruelty, and you're just trying to sell enough skewers to avoid being the next sacrifice. Rome's emperors keep topping each other in the worst way possible, turning the city into a stage for their twisted fantasies. You're exhausted, your body scarred from close calls, your mind frayed from the constant fear. But the empire's not done with you yet. There's more blood, more betrayal, and more imperial insanity waiting in the wings. Hang in there, because this Roman horror show's got one more act to go. You've made it this far, staggering through the gore-stained streets of Rome like a gladiator who forgot his sword. You're a pleb who's dodged Caligula's wolf fights, Nero's human bonfires, Domitian's creepy death dinners, and Elagabalus's snake lottery insanity. Your body's a map of scars, your mind's a wreck, and yet here you are, still breathing in the eternal city, where every emperor seems to have a PhD in depravity and a vendetta against your will to live. This is the final act of our grim saga, and Rome's saving its most unhinged emperors for last, ready to wrap up this horror show with a bloody bow. The gods are still laughing, the crowds are still cheering, and you're just trying to survive one more day in this circus of cruelty. Buckle up, because the grand finale is about to make you wish you'd stayed in bed forever. It's 235 CE, and you're now a potter, shaping clay pots in a dusty workshop, while the empire teeters on the edge of chaos. The Severan dynasty's crumbling, and Rome's entering the crisis of the 3rd century, a fun little period where emperors drop faster than flies in a plague. Enter Maximinus Thrax, a giant of a man who looks like he could bench press a chariot and probably has. You're hoping his soldierly vibe means he's too busy fighting barbarians to bother you, but no such luck. Maximinus needs cash to pay his legions, and guess who's footing the bill? You, the potter, who's now taxed so heavily you're eating clay scraps to survive. You're hauling pots to the market when you hear about his latest stunt. He's confiscating temple treasures to fund his wars. You're not religious, but you know pissing off the gods is a bad idea in Rome. Sure enough, the city's buzzing with rumors of curses, and when a drought hits, the priests blame Maximinus and anyone associated with him. You're dragged to a public purification ritual, where you're forced to kneel in the forum while priests splash you with goat blood and chant about divine wrath. The crowd's throwing rotten figs, and you're pretty sure you're on the gods' naughty list now. Maximinus doesn't care about curses. He's too busy executing anyone who looks at him funny. You're delivering pots to a legion camp when you accidentally overhear a soldier grumbling about the emperor's latest tax hike. Big mistake. Maximinus's spies are everywhere, and before you know it, you're chained in a dungeon, accused of seditious pottery. Yes, apparently your pots are now a threat to the empire. You're spared execution, barely, but only because Maximinus gets assassinated by his own troops. 3 years of terror and you're just glad to see him go. But Rome's not done churning out nightmares. It's 238 CE, the year of the 6 emperors, and you're caught in a whirlwind of coups and counter-coups. You're still a potter, but business is bad because nobody's buying pots when they're too busy dodging swords. The Senate's trying to regain control, propping up puppet emperors like Pupienus and Balbinus, who sound like a comedy duo but are anything but funny. You're conscripted to help fortify the city walls, because apparently potters are now engineers. While you're stacking stones, the Praetorian Guard decides they don't like the new emperors and slaughters them in the palace. You're there, delivering water, because multitasking is your life now, when the blood starts flowing. The guards don't care who you are. They're hacking through anyone in their path. You dive into a pile of broken pottery, praying the shards don't give you away, and somehow survive the massacre. The Senate's out, and a kid named Gordian III takes the throne. He's 13, which you think might mean a break from the madness, but his advisors are running the show, and they're just as ruthless. You're forced to pay a loyalty tax to prove you're not plotting against a literal child, and you're starting to wonder if Rome's just trolling you at this point. Jump to 284 CE, and you're under Diocletian, who's trying to fix the empire's mess, but has a funny way of showing it. You're a tavern keeper now, serving watered-down wine to soldiers and hoping they don't start a brawl. Diocletian's big idea is the Tetrarchy, splitting the empire into 4 parts ruled by 4 emperors, because what could go wrong with more emperors? You're just trying to keep your tavern afloat when Diocletian's anti-Christian edicts come down. He's decided Christians are the empire's scapegoat, and you're not even Christian, but your best customer is. You're forced to attend a public sacrifice to Jupiter, where anyone who refuses to burn incense gets thrown to the lions. You're there, choking on incense fumes, watching as your customer, a nice guy who always tipped in actual coins, gets torn apart in the arena. Diocletian's soldiers are watching you like hawks, and you realize one wrong move could land you in the same cage. The emperor's also got a thing for price controls, which sounds great until you realize you can't sell your wine for enough to cover cost. You're broke, the empire's cracking, and the lions are looking hungrier every day. But Diocletian's not the end of the line. Fast forward to 361 CE, and you're under Julian the Apostate, the guy who wants to bring back paganism in a now mostly Christian empire. You're a scribe now, scratching out contracts on papyrus, because Rome's economy is a mess and you've got to eat. Julian's obsessed with restoring the old gods, and he's got a flair for the dramatic. You're summoned to one of his revivalist ceremonies, where he's sacrificing bulls to Apollo in a temple that's been gathering dust for decades. The blood's flowing, the priests are chanting, and you're just trying to avoid getting splattered. But Julian's not just about rituals. He's got a chip on his shoulder about Christians, and you're caught in the crossfire. Your neighbor, a Christian scribe, gets accused of defacing a pagan altar, and you're dragged in as a witness because you were seen near him last week. You're forced to testify in a kangaroo court, where Julian himself presides, stroking his philosopher's beard and looking like he's enjoying the chaos. Your neighbor's exiled, and you're warned to watch your step because Julian's spies are as zealous as he is. You're starting to think the old gods and the new god are all just excuses for emperors to make your life hell. By now, you're a walking testament to Rome's insanity. your body scarred from close calls, your mind frayed from years of dodging imperial whims. The emperors keep coming, each one a new flavor of awful. Caligula's sadistic parties, Nero's fiery spectacles, Caracalla's massacres, Elagabalus's snake lotteries, and now Diocletian's purges and Julian's pagan revival. You've been a baker, a water carrier, a potter, a tavern keeper, a scribe, and every time, you're just collateral damage in their power games. Rome's not a city, it's a meat grinder, and you're the meat. As you sit in your cramped room, scribbling out another contract, you can't help but laugh, a bitter, broken sound. You've survived the unsurvivable, outlasted emperors who thought they were gods, and come out the other side with stories that'd make the fates wince. Rome's still standing, its aqueducts still flowing, its crowds still cheering for blood. But you're still here, and nobody who's seen too much, lived too long, and somehow kept going. That's your victory, your middle finger to the gods and their deranged puppets. The empire will fall one day, but you, the eternal pleb, are the real survivor of this bloody, absurd, horrifying show. You thought your Monday was rough. Picture this, 10 years lost at sea, battling gods who hate you and monsters who want to eat you. Welcome to Odysseus's commute. Now, buckle up, because the only thing more absurd than his journey is the cosmic prank playing out across the Aegean. He'd barely stashed his new bronze armor on Ithaca's shore when the wine-dark sea, his old frenemy, decided to toss him onto a sandbar and call it a day. His crew, half drowned and wholly terrified, stared at him like he'd led them into a death wish. Odysseus sighed, the kind of sigh that says, I swear, next time I'll just take the Trojan horse home. But before they could mutiny, a chorus of seagulls squawked like Greek critics, reminding him that things could always get worse. Wading through brine and broken dreams, he spotted a lonely cave carved into the cliff. A cozy spot if you ignore the part about pagan rituals. Inside lurked a giant cyclops named Polyphemus, who greeted them with a grin that screamed bad idea. Odysseus, never one to shy from terrible decisions, introduced himself with the subtlety of a Greek hero craving a mug of wine. Polyphemus, believing himself invincible and lonely, decided scarred sailors made perfect pets. One by one, Odysseus's men vanished into the giant's belly, like local tapas for a cyclopean gourmand. Odysseus, face pale but mind still scheming, offered the Cyclops a toast. Nomen, he claimed, raising his cup. Polyphemus guzzled the wine, blissfully unaware that within each sip lay Odysseus's best hope. After the Cyclops passed out, Odysseus and the few survivors drove a sharpened olive trunk into his single eye, because nothing says eyewitness testimony like a wooden stake, and squeaked past the blinded brute by clinging to the bellies of his sheep. As they slipped away at dawn, Polyphemus's roars echoed mournfully, "Nomen has hurt me," which it turns out is a pretty lousy alibi. Proud of his cunning, Odysseus climbed aboard his raft thinking, finally smooth sailing, famous last words. But Poseidon, offended at the eye-stabbing, think of it as jaywalking in godly terms, stirred storms that churned like divine coffee makers on overdrive. Zephyrs and Zeuses tossed the raft this way and that until Odysseus washed up on the shores of Aeolus, master of winds, who gifted him a leather bag containing all winds except the west one. Victory at last! Except, blinked Aeolus, real heroism begins when your men unstop your secret windbag just because they're curious, and you wake up sailing backwards toward home. They feasted, celebrated, and cursed each other inside the bag's gale until Aeolus, convinced they were cursed creatures, slammed the door on them forever. Next stop, the island of the Lestrygonians, a tribe of giants with a taste for human necks. Odysseus watched helplessly as they crushed ships like grape stalks and gobbled his crew as though hungry for an all-you-can-eat sailboat buffet. Only his own battered vessel survived the slaughter, a grim trophy of endurance. With a tenth of his original comrades, he set sail again, blank stare firmly in place. Then came the witch Circe, who invited them in for drinks and turned half the men into pigs. Because what's dinner without a side of bestial transformation? Hermes, the winged messenger, snuck Odysseus a magical herb so he could resist her charms and demand her reverse the spell. Circe, impressed by his pluck and perhaps his rugged cheekbones, agreed. She swore loyalty and hosted them for a year in sumptuous luxury, complete with feasts, music, and zero thoughts of home. Odysseus could have stayed until retirement, but nostalgia, that bitter tonic, eventually kicked in. The rocky coast of Ithaca beckoned louder than Circe's siren call. Before he could shipwreck again, Circe warned him of the underworld's horrors. Ghosts of the dead, blood-drinking sacrifices, and a barber, Sisyphus's cousin, who relived bad grooming days for all eternity. Odysseus, half grimacing, followed her instructions. Dig a pit, sprinkle barley and honey, pour blood, and recite a prayer that would make any poet retire on the spot. Shades of heroes rose, begging for news, lamenting the state of the living world. Glorious Achilles nursing his wounds of pride. Agamemnon bitter over spousal treachery. Odysseus vowed enmity like a vow at a toxic family reunion, and finally glimpsed Tiresias, blind seer extraordinaire. He warned Odysseus of more trials to come, Scylla and Charybdis, cattle of the sun god, and the wrath of Poseidon, and sketched him the roadmap out of Hades. Resurrected in spirit, if not in body, Odysseus tagged along with spirits swirling like wine in a cup. He reached the exit, no VIP passes, just humble obedience, and re-emerged under storm-veiled skies. The sun barely peeked over the water's edge when he recalled the warning. Steer clear of Helios's sacred cattle on Thrinacia. But hunger, that eternal instigator of bad ideas, gnawed at his crew. They landed, feasted on lamb and beef despite Odysseus's pleadings, and set the herds aflame for later meals. Lucky break? Number. Helios demanded justice, threatened to light the sky ablaze, and Zeus obliged by hurled lightning bolts that snuffed the ship and sank his men like stones. Odysseus, once again solo, drifted on a makeshift plank for 9 days, babbling to gulls about his lousy pension plan. On the 10th day, he washed ashore Ogrigia, home to Calypso the nymph, who fell hopelessly for his rugged distress. She offered immortality and eternal bliss, basically vacation forever on her lush island. Odysseus, lips cracked from salt and wishes, pondered the offer, but the memory of Penelope's weaving and the cries of his son Telemachus called him back. After 7 years of clandestine strolls along her shore and nightly repertoires of heroic laments, he begged Calypso for a raft. She wept, the sea calmed, and he set sail again under stern Hera's watchful eye. Poseidon, back from lunch with the other Olympians, spotted his mortal nemesis afloat and brewed a storm that would make caffeine addicts weep. Odysseus clawed at the waves, desperately recalling Circe's talcum magic to keep his wits. A divine sea goddess, Ino, tossed him a veil that warded off drowning, because even gods occasionally play fairy godmothers. Clutching the linen, he drifted until crashing onto Scheria, land of the Phaeacians, who prided themselves on hospitality to castaways, certainly not to hurricane fugitives. They plied him with food, song, and inquisitive glances, coaxing from his cracked lips every gruesome detail of his odyssey. For 3 days, Odysseus recounted plagues of locusts. No, not locusts, a bedazzling sea witch whose spell lasted a year, sirens whose song melted men's brains, a whale-sized whirlpool, 6-headed sea creatures, and rotting cattle. When at last he fell silent, exhausted and delirious, Alcinous the king nodded and commanded a ship to Ithaca. Languid oars sliced the foam as Odysseus drifted between relief and apprehension, rehearsing the lies he'd tell if he lived that long. This, dear listener, is where legend pauses, breath held between promise and peril. Odysseus, hero and hapless victim of divine pranks, edges back to skeletal walls of his home. Will Penelope's faith hold? Will suitors still feast on his flocks? Will his son, grown to a man's height, recognize the haunted stranger? Stay tuned. The nightmare has only just circled back to its doorstep. You think surviving sea monsters was the worst? Try walking into your own home and finding it turned into a frat house. Odysseus blinked against the dawn's light, chest heaving as if the salt waves were still gurgling in his lungs. The Phaeacian ship had delivered him to Ithaca's rocky shore under cover of moonlight. No grand welcome parade, just a drenched hero and 2 sleeping guards who'd mistake him for a drunk bard if they awoke. He hauled his war-scarred body from the surf, nudging aside seaweed like a man dislodging last night's regrets. His wooden hairpin had cracked sometime between wreck and landfall, and his cloak stuck to him like a second skin. Disguised by Athena's magic as a grizzled vagabond, beard unkempt, heel calloused, eyes hollow, He scouted the distant terraces of his palace. Smoke curled lazily from the kitchens, and laughter clanged like rusty armor. Suitors, 180 braggarts in tunics 2 sizes too large, gorged on his flocks, gambled his silver, and launched insults at his absent son. If whiffing goats and stale wine could kill, Odysseus would have keeled over thrice by now. But patience was his deadliest weapon. He stumbled upon Eumaeus, his old swineherd, hands caked in mud, whistling to a litter of piglets as if they were newborn princes. Eumaeus wiped his brow, cocked his head at the stranger's ragged cloak, and offered a crust of bread with the hospitality of a saint. Odysseus accepted without a word, savoring the dryness. It beat scuttling back into the sea. Over goat cheese and olives, the swineherd spoke of his master's kingdom, how Penelope's nightly weaving ritual had become a national joke, how young Telemachus, now a lanky youth, planned to launch a revolt against the suitors, and how the stranger's face was rumored to be more changeling than king. When Telemachus crested the hillside at Eumaeus's call, the son nearly dropped his spear in shock. His eyes sharpened, suspicion pooling like rainwater in a hollow. Odysseus watched the reunion, father and son, 2 ghosts recognizing each other through Athena's fog, and felt a lump in his throat that no hero's pride could swallow. Telemachus greeted him as a refugee from the war, unaware his guest was the very man whose name sold swords by the thousands. Yet the spark in his gaze, the fierce longing for a father who'd been myth, steadied Odysseus's weary soul. Under a moonless sky, the 3 conspired. Odysseus would remain the mendicant, probing the palace defenses and cloaking his return in rumor. Telemachus would hide the palace arms in an inner storehouse, locking the suitors in at feast time. Eumaeus and another faithful swineherd, Philoetius, would seal the gates from without. It was the kind of plan that risked turning neighbor against neighbor, but necessity made conspirators of them all. Morning dawned on a spectacle of decadence. The suitors, bedraggled from wine, summoned the stranger to prove his rumors of royal blood. Antinous, leader and loudest of the freeloaders, hurled a stale loaf at Odysseus, smirking as it crumbled on his shoulder. Our king caught the pieces, nibbled thoughtfully, and offered criticism worthy of a Michelin reviewer. The crowd laughed until he elbowed Antinous in the ribs, then mischievously recited the suitor's lineage back to a scandalous goat-riding great-uncle. The hall fell silent. Laughter curdled into suspicion. At the moment of maximum chaos, Penelope entered. Time seemed to pause. Her weaving lay abandoned at her feet, eyes weary yet fierce, bearing the wounds of 10 long years. She approached the stranger. Odysseus measured that breath as longer than any storm at sea, and asked him to tell her news of her husband, though she prayed he'd remain lost. His voice caught, but he spun a tale of a man so cunning that even the gods envied his returns. Penelope's gaze, sharp as Hephaestus's forge, scanned every nuance, but she dared no challenge. Grief had made her cautious, hope had made her cruel. All that afternoon, Odysseus played the part of storyteller, weaving half-truths with crumbs of memory. He described fresh-caught fish the very night of his island escape, in just enough detail of Ithaca's hidden bay to stiffen his son's resolve. He praised Penelope's loom work as if he'd glimpsed it by torchlight, leaving her to wonder if the gods had sprung a trick upon her. Meanwhile, the suitors feasted and leered, their tables groaning under the weight of stolen porridge and Odysseus's vanquished flocks. Late that evening, a trumpet call. Penelope decreed one final contest, to the man who could string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe-handle sockets. If the stranger failed, she would marry one of the suitors. If one of them won, she'd dispatch the vagabond to beggary. The hall ignited with excitement. The suitors flexed sinews that had only known feasting, their wine blood racing through veins stuffed with rancid cheese. Hauling the bow, a relic carved from a sacred olive strung by a god's own hands, Odysseus tested its tension. The suitors gulped as the string sang under his skilled fingers. One by one they tried, they grimaced, strained, even begged for the string to give way. Wooden beams split under their efforts, pride shredded like old parchment, humiliation soaked the room like rain on parched earth. Seizing the moment, Odysseus revealed himself. He lofted the arrow, letting Athena guide his aim. It sailed true, cleaving the first socket with a sharp ring that echoed like verdict. The suitors froze, wine-gorged jaws slack. With another pull, Odysseus turned the bow on Antinous, who, in a panic, ducked behind wine jars like a half-chewed grape hiding in brine. The arrow found its mark in the binge drinker's throat, and Antinous collapsed, corked in blood. Pandemonium erupted in an uproar of spilled goblets and abandoned swords. Odysseus and Telemachus moved like twin shadows, retrieving weapons from their hidden cache. Eumaeus barred the doors. Philoethea scattered the suitors into two corridors. The hall became an arena of raw fear. Suitors tripped over each other, slashing wildly at nether limbs, crying out for mercy they never earned. Blood pooled beneath marble floors, to be washed away by Minerva's tears, if any goddess cared. At last, silence fell, broken only by wheezing breaths and the clatter of weapons dropped in defeat. Odysseus stood amid the carnage, knees trembling like a sapling in a gale. Penelope emerged, cloak clasp fallen, eyes bright with tears and anger. She approached him, hand outstretched, not for a crown, but to brush the blood from his cheek. He knelt, trembling, and let her hold him. In that moment, home felt less like walls and more like a hard, honest truth. Yet the gods, always eager to stir mortal pots, demanded final rites. Odysseus visited Laertes, his aging father, in his poor orchard where fig leaves clung like memories. The old king, jaundiced by grief, tested his visitor by offering a crust. Any beggar deserved food in Ithaca. Odysseus produced his scar, courtesy of a boar hunt on Parnassus, and Laertes wept, arms trembling around the son he thought drowned. Their embrace summoned vengeful shades of the suitor's kin, who demanded blood for blood. Athena appeared, spear in hand, intervening in divine debate. She brokered peace. Odysseus would pay reparations from his ruined stores, restore the suitors' households, and promise no further vengeance. In return, the suitors' families would swear oath of loyalty to Ithaca's king. The assembly, awed by the goddess's threat of thunderbolts, relented. At last the island exhaled. Ithaca's stones, soaked in blood and tears, warmed under the rising sun. Odysseus, once wanderer, now anchored by wife, son, and father, reclaimed his hearth. He recounted his Odyssey to a new generation, children who'd know him not as myth but flesh, scar, and story. The halls rang with laughter once more, tempered by memory's ache, reminding all that every homecoming bore its scars. But in the silent hours before dawn, Odysseus would walk to the shore, tracing the horizon where foam met sky. For in the marrow of his blood lurked the call of distant seas, the itch of uncharted shores. The world was wide, the gods capricious, and the heart of a hero, like that bow, strained between duty and desire, forever bent toward the next impossible shot. Odysseus thought the worst was behind him. After all, he'd stared down gods, monsters, and one hellish house full of freeloaders. But the fates, ever in the mood for a cosmic joke, weren't done with him yet. Ithaca shimmered in the sun like a mirage of peace, terraced orchards heavy with olives, smell of fresh bread mingling with sea salt, the temple bells tinkling in the distance. For a moment, ruling the island felt as simple as sipping wine at dawn. He and Penelope restored their home, rebuilding walls cracked by decades of neglect, teaching the new generation the art of weaving and spearcraft, laughing over wine-stained maps of their journeys. Telemachus grew into his father's height, but kept his own brand of gentle cunning, more diplomat than warrior, which suited a king in peacetime just fine. Yet every so often, Odysseus caught himself staring at the horizon, as if expecting Poseidon to rear a new tempest or Athena to whisper of fresh challenges. He told Penelope that old heroes aged like fine wine, in casks safe from scrawl of time, but nighttime dreams gave no quarter. He saw Cyclopean caves, heard the siren's last song, felt the cloven hooves of sun god's cattle behind him. When he woke, limbs cramped like salted fish, he'd swear off yarn spinning about future voyages. But curiosity is a hero's true poison, and after 5 winters of calm, he found his sea legs itching to feel a ship's deck underfoot again. Meanwhile, on an island forgotten by most maps, Circe the enchantress brooded over her own exile. She'd sent Odysseus off 7 years before with gifts enough to stock half their kingdom. golden cups, ambrosial molybdenancy tools, tales to regale any mortal. But something gnawed at her, a promise unsaid, a love unclaimed. In a grotto by a moonlit shore, she bore a son, Telegonus, whose hair glowed with the promise of dawn and whose eyes held storms. She named him Son of the Far Off and spun him on her knee stories of his mortal father, the man who had loved her, then left her for another life. Telegonus grew tall and curious, a hybrid of divinity and humanity, honest as a cyclops, innocent of fear. At every telling, his mother's voice trembled, as though the ache in her heart threatened to break the spell of the night. On Ithaca, Telemachus wrestled with his own ghosts. He'd rebuilt his father's palace stronger than before, stocked the larders and granaries, and hammered bronze shields for his father's men. Yet in council, he felt like a man playing at kingship, paddling in waters deeper than his oar could reach. Every foolish suitor's son who washed up on Ithacan shores tested his patience. Every rumor that Odysseus might return in disguise sent ripples through his court. Penelope watched her son with wary pride. She'd woven too many webs of cunning herself to miss the anxious set of his jaw. There came a day when Telemachus announced he would journey abroad, to visit old comrades of his father and gather news of lands Odysseus once cursed or courted. That expedition began with farewells more bittersweet than any Ithacan grape. Penelope kissed her son's brow, Odysseus clapped him on the shoulder, but each knew that woe rode on journeys that spanned the wine-dark sea. Telemachus took a ship crewed by veteran sailors, some who'd seen his father off at Troy, others who'd pulled oars through his father's darker days, and set a course westward, where legend said Circe's island lay cloaked in mists and danger. The voyage felt to Odysseus like watching his own heart sail away, but he masked the tremor with a smile. After all, a king mustn't crumble at port. Circe's isle, Ogygia reborn, was no paradise but a place of reckoning. Its forests were thick with sudden shadows, its shores littered with the bones of would-be suitors who perished in the nymph's wrath or mercy. Stories varied. Telegonus arrived under a sky so heavy with foreboding it seemed ready to break. His crew found Circe's palace overgrown, columns twisted like ancient trees, the hearth cold. In the courtyard, they encountered Circe herself, older, her beauty mellowed like incense fading, robes woven of twilight mist. She greeted them as if expecting them, her voice sliding between warmth and warning. Telegonus, head held high, declared his quest, to find his father, the hero of 10 years' journey, master of cunning. Circe's eyes glistened. This was the moment she'd feared and longed for. She summoned visions of Odysseus's return to Ithaca, of the bloody feast hall, of his iron-hearted vengeance. Yet when Telegonus asked where to find his father, Circe hesitated. Mortal blood and divine blood mixed precariously in her son's veins. She offered him a potion to see through veils of fate, but as Telegonus swallowed it, lightning flickered overhead, Athena's silent curse. The world blurred, and for a heartbeat, he glimpsed 2 thrones, one in a palace of polished stone and one in a cave of shifting shadows. Father and son divided by time, fate, and the whim of gods. Meanwhile, word reached Ithaca that Telemachus' ship was overdue. Odysseus paced the beach, ears straining for the call of gulls. Penelope wove and unwove a grief too deep for tears. On the 7th dawn, a battered bark appeared, its sails tattered like grief-stricken hearts. Only one living soul remained intact, Telegonus clutching an axe tipped with bronze that gleamed with terrible purpose. He carried with him a story too dangerous to breathe, that the man he'd been told was his father, Odysseus, had slain suitors and cleaved the bonds of blood. But the ache for kinship lured him to shore, despite dread coiling in his heart like a viper. Odysseus, upon seeing the stranger, felt the old familiar surge of joy, followed swiftly by a dread that rotted his ribs. He approached, spear lowered, thinking surely the boy would kneel and swear an oath of fealty. Instead, Telegonus raised his axe in trembling hands and cried out, "Father, by blood and honor I claim your name." In one instinctive motion, Odysseus stepped forward to embrace him, too late to dodge the bronze arc. The axe struck true, cleaving flesh at his hip, spilling red against white linen. The wound burned with a fury no god could temper. Odysseus fell, eyes wide not with surprise but the cruelest of ironies. killed by the son he never knew. Penelope swooned in horror. Telemachus charged forward, too late to catch his father's last breath. He knelt beside Odysseus, pressed a hand to the wound that burned like the roaring of the sea in winter, and swore vengeance. Circe arrived, tears streaking her face like rain on marble, and wove a healing mush from ambrosia and bitter herbs. She laid Odysseus's head upon her knee, murmured lullabies of the dawn, but the wound had drawn too much life. With a final sigh that tasted of salt and the memory of home, Odysseus exhaled his spirit into the hands of the gods. The island recoiled under a silence deeper than any storm. Birds dared not sing, olives hung heavy with grief, even the sea seemed to curl inward. Penelope cradled her husband's body, voice breaking as she recited every name he'd ever whispered in the night. Ithaca, Telemachus, cunning, revenge, love. Telemachus stood at her side, his spear lowered at last, tears falling like silver across his father's sun-darkened face. Circe, banished from her island by grief, knelt to wash the blood from Odysseus's wounds. She whispered a vow to bury him on the shores he'd yearned for, beside the sea he'd never leave behind. The funeral pyre was built where land kissed sea, as Odysseus had once dreamed on nights when salt spray kissed his lips. Telemachus lit the flames, voice steady as he recounted the Odyssey, the Cyclops' cave, the winds of Aeolus, the witch's brew, the harpy's shriek, the sun god's wrath, the siren's song, the cannibal giants, the wrath of gods. Flames danced like memories, consuming wood and armor, smoke spiraling upward as an offering to Zeus and Athena. When the fire died, only ashes remained, white as bone, dark as grief. In the weeks that followed, Ithaca mourned its king. The refugees of wandering bards sang of Odysseus's cunning and flaws in equal measure, a hero who outwitted death but fell to love's cruel edge, a man who survived monsters abroad but could not survive kinship at home. Penelope, draped in widow's linen, never wove again. Instead, she painted symbols of sea and sky on walls, a silent tribute to the man she'd loved across ages. Telemachus declared a new era. No more feasts for strangers, no more songs of war, only peace tempered by the memory of blood. Yet, some nights, when the moon drifted across the water like a ghost ship, Penelope would tiptoe to the shore and scatter grains of barley on the sand, an offering to sailors lost at sea, and a whisper of forgiveness to a husband she'd let slip away. Telemachus, watching from the cliffs, would pray for guidance, to rule wisely, to honor his father's legacy, to resist the storms that brewed in his own heart. Circe, far away, would gaze at the same moon, whisper curses on the gods for their meddling and blessings on Odysseus for teaching mortals how to live and die with equal valor. Thus ends the third act of our tale, the hero's final voyage not across oceans but beyond the limits of his own mortality, the Odyssey that returns him not to a palace but to the embrace of legend. And though his body lies beneath Ithaca's stones, the echo of his laughter and his curses rides the wind whenever the sea roars in anger or the night hums with whispers of moonlight and madness. For in every wave that breaks upon a distant shore, Odysseus still sails, a silhouette against the horizon, forever chasing the next impossible shot. Imagine the sun sinking on Ithaca's shore as a lone figure strides through olive groves, scars both old and fresh marking his skin, only to find the horizon not as promise, but as an epitaph. This is where our hero's tale truly fractures between myth and mortar. It began on the night of the funeral feast, when Telemachus, king at last, stood over his father's ashes and vowed to honor Odysseus by forging a legacy of peace. Yet peace, like fine wine, can sour in the hands of mortals. As the embers cooled, whispers rippled through the courts. Neighboring lords coveted Ithaca's olive groves, and wandering mercenaries eyed its silver stores. Telemachus, still learning the weight of a crown, convened his council beneath flickering torchlight. Eumaeus and Philoctetes, now commanders, urged caution. Let no stranger set foot unbidden. But ambition, a seed sown by loss, sprouted in courtiers' hearts. Meanwhile, Penelope retreated into her chamber, sealing it each dusk behind bolts of bronze. She filled scrolls with Odysseus's exploits, dirges that mirrored her own sorrow, and began teaching the women of Ithaca to read in the hero's hand. Their letters slid like nectar across parchment. Endurance is both curse and gift, one read. Yet in the quiet hours, Penelope faltered, haunted by the echo of her husband's laughter on the wind. Each night she climbed to the rooftop, stared at the broken bow resting on its stand, and whispered, "Bring me a sign, just one more journey." Beyond Ithaca's reefs, Circe's island grew silent. The enchantress, cursed by her own grief, watched her son Telegonus wrestle with prophecy. He'd seen his father's death in a flash of bronze and now recoiled from his own strength. Circe, fearing he would repeat history's cruel jest, sent ravens to Ithaca bearing gifts, ambrosial honey, enchanted oil, and a sealed letter foretelling storms yet to come. The letter arrived in Telemachus's hand, bearing Athena's seal in crescent moon gold. "Beware the sea that sleeps." That warning should have stilled Ithaca's ambition, but in courts where power is measured in armed ships rather than olive press, weight doubt breeds courage or folly. Telemachus dispatched envoys to Sparta and Argos, forging alliances sealed with gold and marriage. His younger sister, Chrysothemis, wed the Spartan heir, vows sworn over a wine cup dipped in Cyrene's beeswax. Though meant to secure peace, these alliances entwined Ithaca and mainland, squabbles older than Nestor's wine. As winter thawed into spring, the first omen arrived on a mist-shrouded dawn. Fishing boats returned battered, nets torn by unseen claws. Sailors told of a vast shape circling their keels, neither whale nor fish, but something older, bristling with barnacles and eyes like lanterns. Telemachus summoned the seeress Melantho, who spat barley on a bronze dish and read the grains. The sea's heart churns, seeking what was abandoned. He ordered the trireme vigilant armed and ready, its prow carved with Odysseus's spiked helmet. Eumaeus, gray now but unbowed, took command, eyes glinting with loyalty to a memory rather than a man. On the vigilant's deck, the crew lit braziers to ward off cold. Melantho prowled beneath night sky, chanting hymns to Poseidon for mercy. Days passed without sighting, until on the seventh dawn, they found a drifting raft, its timbers warped, its lone survivor a sea-blind fisherman babbling of cyclopean whispers. He spoke of a hollow in the waves, a yawning mouth that could swallow ships whole. When pressed, he raised trembling hands and declared he'd glimpsed Odysseus's face in the foam. A warning or a curse. Word of this phantom sighting flamed across Ithaca like dry grass in wind. Penelope, hearing it, wept in her chamber, convinced her husband's spirit roamed the depths seeking reprisal. Telemachus thrice considered tearing down the bow's stand, but stopped himself, fearing that removing the last relic of his father would unravel the island's fragile identity. Instead, he called for vigil. Torches to light the beach at night, trumpets to warn of shadows, banquets canceled to save provisions. Ithaca held its breath as the sea murmured against the stones. Then, on a moonless night, the vigilant's horn shattered silence. Smoke from signal fires curled toward the stars. Eumaeus returned, gaunt and weary. The sea beast had appeared, a hulking phantom larger than any trireme, its roar shaking masts and marrow. Eumaeus swore it was no natural creature, but a god's avatar, Poseidon's rage incarnate. The monster's eyes glowed phosphorescent, and it lashed the waters with tentacles that sank ships under their own anchors. Of the Vigilant's 50 crew, only 10 survived, clinging to flotsam until the dawn freed them. Panic seized Ithaca. Children trembled in corners, merchants shuttered stalls, and the palace gates groaned under the weight of fear. Advocates clamored, "It's punishment for Odysseus's crimes." Others blamed Telemachus's Spartan alliance for stirring old vendettas. Amid the uproar, Penelope emerged, draped in black and bearing the broken bow. In the palace square, she addressed the island. "My husband returned, only to teach us that survival demands sacrifice. Now our island bleeds. Shall we cling to relics of the past or take up arms with the courage of a king?" Her voice, honed by grief, fell like a verdict. The crowd, a sea of anxious faces, parted as Telemachus stepped forward, grasping the bow's string. "I will sail beyond our reefs," he announced, "to seek that phantom and end its terror." Cognizant of the prophecy, he invited Circe's envoy, a single raven that landed on his shoulder, to guide him. Chrysothemis, defying her husband's guard, insisted on accompanying him, believing that family bond could tame even divine wrath. Thus, the new generation, son and daughter of Ithaca, prepared a vessel larger than any Odysseus had known. Its sails dyed deep crimson in honor of their fallen father. As they set forth at dawn, Penelope's tears mingled with salt spray. Eumaeus and Philoetius, their old bones straining, blessed the prow and set the household gods atop its forecastle. The island watched in grim solidarity until the ship's silhouette faded into sea mist. In its wake, Ithaca felt bereft once more. Their voyage led past sunken reefs and shifting shoals. Melantho's chants echoed against starless skies, and the raven circled overhead, guiding them through currents older than memory. Days merged into nights until at last they beheld the monstrous shape, a colossal creature with a carapace of barnacled rock and eyes that burned like lanterns in dead wood. It towered above their mastheads, its roar a gale that rattled timbers and hearts alike. Telemachus, sword in hand, stood on deck beside Chrysothemis, who clutched the raven to her breast as if its feathers could ward off death. They drew nearer, the sea hissing around the creature's limbs. Telemachus called out, voice steady, "Ithaca stands! If you are Poseidon's wrath, take me instead of these harmless women." The monster paused as though startled by mortal audacity. In that tense moment, Chrysothemis stepped forward, offering the bow's broken string. "We bear the symbol of his cunning. Accept this, and let our island live." The creature reached a barnacle-encrusted limb toward them. Time slowed. The scale of vengeance hung in the air like a blade. Then, with a rumble that split the sea foam, it lowered its limb and touched the bowstring with a single tentacle. A flash of light, neither wave nor spark, engulfed the deck. Telemachus and Chrysothemis felt a tremor pass through their bones, as if the world itself shivered. When the light faded, the creature had vanished. In its place, bobbing on the waters, lay a chest of gleaming bronze. Bold letters etched on the lid read, "For those who honor heart and home." Inside were gifts beyond mortal ken, a vial of ambrosia that healed any wound, a horn that, when blown, calmed storms, and a tablet inscribed with Poseidon's own hand, declaring Ithaca under his protection, so long as its rulers remembered mercy. Tears streamed from Telemachus's eyes as he lifted the horn to his lips and blew a blast that stilled the winds. Chrysothemis opened the ambrosia vial and poured its contents into the sea, offering it back to the waters that had claimed so much. They set sail for home, chests secured beneath the forecastle, Raven guiding them through calm seas and starlit nights. When they returned, Ithaca rejoiced as though the sun had risen for the first time. Penelope ran to embrace them, and the island's people bowed in humble gratitude. Telemachus placed the gifts before the household gods. The bow was repaired and hung in the palace hall as a reminder that courage and compassion must be wielded in equal measure. Thus did Ithaca enter a new era, one that balanced remembrance with renewal. The shrines to Odysseus thrived alongside those to Poseidon. Merchants inscribed the tablet's words on their ships' prows, and sailors sang songs of the bow-breaking peace. Under Telemachus's reign, the island prospered. Olive yields doubled, silver trade flourished, and tales of the sea beast became lessons in humility rather than terror. And Penelope? She laid down her loom at last, walking to the shore each dawn to scatter white petals on the water, symbols of letting go and embracing what comes. On nights when the moon cast its silver beam across the sea, she would hum the old songs of her husband's sailing days, imagining him forever chasing the next horizon. So ends the final chapter, not with a hero's arrival, but with a people's awakening. That survival is not merely returning home, but forging home worthy of return. In every breeze that whispers through Ithaca's olive trees, you can hear Odysseus's laughter tinged with irony. The greatest odyssey, after all, is knowing when to stay. You think modern marriage negotiations are tough? Imagine being dragged before your husband's father, accused of undermining Rome itself, all because you dared to say no. Julia straightened her stola as she stepped across the threshold of the atrium, every mosaic tile beneath her sandals a mosaic of expectations. In Rome, a wife's refusal was more than a marital spat. It was a direct challenge to her husband's imperium, to her father-in-law's auctoritas, and, by extension, to the state itself. The moment she voiced her dissent, she risked being branded in Corsa, unyielding, a label as sticky and dangerous as laurel-wreathed togas soaked in the blood of gladiators. It started innocently enough. Lucius, a prosperous equestrian newly appointed to the cursus honorum, demanded Julia produce an heir, preferably a boy. She, still recovering from Antonius's fourth villa-bound bacchanal, begged for more time, urging a summer pregnancy to spare both her and the unborn from winter fevers. Lucius, who prized his gravitas above all, heard his wife's plea not as prudence but as proof of cowardice. In the eyes of Rome, a soldier's wife who delayed an heir delayed the perpetuation of the familia's legacy, jeopardizing the genes and, by extension, the Republic. When Julia refused again, this time by declining to call his slaves to bear witness to her readiness, Lucius stormed to his father, Publius Cornelius, senator and former praetor. Within the peristyle, surrounded by marble columns echoing with the last breath of Cato's speeches, the Cornelii men convened a private tribunal. Julia's dowry, a hefty portfolio of olive groves and mainland estates, hung in the balance. Property in Roman law was a cudgel, and she, in refusing, risked seeing it snatched away. "Let her speak," Publius commanded, voice a blend of stern tradition and senatorial pomposity. Julia paced into the circle of men, each man's purple-bordered toga a bar of the prison she faced. She explained the lingering ache in her joints, the ghostly tremors that followed her last childbirth. She begged for a year, a single harvest to restore her strength so she might bear a healthy child. The men exchanged glances. Mercy, to Romans, was the trick of politicians, not the act of justice. Lucius rose, face flush with indignation. "My father served at Actium," he thundered. "He forged victory from chaos. My wife's trembling limbs are no excuse. I demand obedience." At that moment, Julia understood. In Rome, a wife's body was her husband's province, as surely as Sicily was the grain store of the empire. Her refusal was an affront not only to Lucius's virility, but to the entire hierarchy of masculine power. Yet Julia was no mere stola-clad victim. She invoked the example of Livia Drusilla, the august matron who maneuvered behind scenes, planning fears and hopes in Augustus's mind. She spoke of Cornelia, mother of the Gracchi, whose widow's peak of influence eclipsed many a senator's. The men shifted uncomfortably. Every woman of Rome was a potential model of cunning resistance, her silence louder than any riot in the Forum. Aware that outright rebellion would cost her dowry and perhaps her freedom, refusing to obey could lead to manus deliver. Julia offered a compromise. If Lucius would accompany her to the temple of Juno Lucina, goddess of childbirth, and vow publicly that her health was his paramount concern, she would consent to a betrothal ceremony renewal in 6 months, affirming her faith in his leadership. The proposal shocked the tribunal. To call upon a husband to kneel before a wife's deity was almost sacrilegious. Publius, stroking his silver chin, weighed the risk. Legally, he could strip Julia of her dowry for insubordination. Socially, however, he risked turning his daughter-in-law into a martyr among the matrons, who gossip as efficiently as any slave-run taberna. To avoid public scandal, he granted the petition, on the condition that Julia's petition be inscribed in the family's archives, a record of her virtue in seeking health. Lucius grudgingly agreed, his pride bruised but his power intact. As Julia left the tribunal, she felt both triumphant and hollow. She'd bought fragile peace with a public declaration that her body was a political terrain, a commodity for negotiation. Behind her, the Cornelii scribes etched her plea into wax tablets, an eternal reminder of the cost of saying no. Outside, the fountains of the Atrium Vestae gurgled, their sacred waters mocking her victory as mere survival in Rome's grand game of power. Over the next months, Lucius accompanied Julia to every shrine, tracking her health with the zeal he once reserved for military parades. He swore each morning upon her footstool, calling on Juno, Dea, and Apollo to grant her strength. Courtiers whispered that the senator's son was subdued, a puppet tied by his wife's fragile life. Julia, ever mindful of survival's absurd extremes, arranged for secret gatherings of other matrons, trading stories of forced obedience and stolen estates. In the flickering torchlight of clandestine triclinia, they laughed with bitter irony. In Rome, refusal was both a crime and a spectacle, but Julia's reprieve was precarious. When a neighboring landowner schemed to claim her olive groves, citing ambiguous clauses in the dowry contract, Lucius hesitated to defend her, wary of prying eyes in the Senate. The threat forced Julia's hand. She appealed to the Vestal Virgins, invoking Rome's ancient religious customs to arbitrate her property rights. The image of a married woman seeking arbitration from celibate priestesses scandalized the aristocracy, yet, under the weight of ancestral piety and Julia's dogged resolve, the claim was dismissed. Triumph rippled through Julia's veins, but it tasted of ash. Every victory in Roman courts widened the chasm between husband and wife, transformed conjugal life into a theater of suspicion. Dinner conversations in the Domus felt like Senate debates, each request a proposal for new legislation. Julia penned letters to her mother back in Transpadana, weaving cautionary tales of Roman misogyny with sardonic humor. I now know why Juno Lucina's temple stands where it does, on the Esquiline hill overlooking the Forum, so every woman can whisper prayers for mercy under the watchful eyes of men. By the end of her second trimester, Lucius's demands returned with renewed force. The archives noted that Julia had recovered sufficiently. The doctor's reports judged her fit for conception. When she balked again, citing premonitory nightmares of shrieking infants in Tiber floodwaters, Lucius tore the report from the archives and hurled it at her feet. His rage was the rage of Rome itself, impatience with any obstacle to its unending expansion, its unyielding definitions of duty. Julia realized that in refusing, she risked more than property. She risked exile or even patria potestas imprisonment, confined under her father-in-law's roof until she submitted. The absurdity of Roman law allowed a paterfamilias to imprison his own son, and by extension, his daughter-in-law, for the greater good of the family's honor. With every refusal, Julia became more aware that her body, her choices, and her very words were subject to a patriarchal tribunal that recognized no boundary between public and private. Standing in her shadowed chamber late one night, Julia remembered the words of Antonia Minor. A woman's courage is the soil in which Rome's greatness takes root. She resolved to stand firm, to let her refusal echo like temple bells across the Brid, Palatine Hill. For if Rome demanded compliance, then perhaps it deserved a reminder that empires rest not on marble columns, but on the fragile defiance of those they seek to dominate. As Julia drifted to sleep, she wondered if her story would become legend, a matron who survived Rome's patriarchal crucible, who transformed refusal into a quiet rebellion against the absurdities of survival. An Odyssey fought not with sword or shield, but with the simple, enduring power of no. Can you hear that? It's the clatter of sandals on marble, the murmur of gossip in the atrium, the subtle creak of a lock being turned, and in that sound lies the most dangerous power in Rome, a wife plotting her own salvation. Julia awoke before dawn, the faint smell of olive oil lamps still warm on the walls. In the dim light she dressed not in her finest stola, but in a simple tunic, cinched at the waist with a thin leather girdle. Each knot reminded her that freedom, like clothing, had to be fastened carefully or risk slipping away. She slipped past the still chambermaids, their own dreams heavy with fear, and crossed the peristyle into the gardens where moonlight wrestled with shadows. Her breath caught at the sight of the silver pool, its surface broken only by a solitary fish's ripple. In that silent world, she felt the vast absurdity of her life. A woman of property and rank, yet shackled by laws penned by men who never felt the pinch of a tightened belly or the ache of swollen ankles. Tonight she would test the boundaries of her so-called rights. By the time first light touched the cypresses, Julia stood before the door of the Vestal Virgin's atrium. The statue of Vesta loomed like a vigilant mother, shorn of voice but not of power. She had bribed a junior priestess days before, 7 denarii for a single favor, and now, in whispered pleasantries and curt nods, that favor took shape. A midnight petition to the Pontifex Maximus. If Rome would not respect her body, she would make them fear her faith. Meanwhile, Lucius roused himself in the Domus, dreams of triumphing heirs replaced by nightmares of silent infant wails. He stormed through his morning salutations, barking orders to his freedmen to secure a workshop for new togas, his way of reminding himself of control. But control, he'd learn, was as elusive as smoke in the Forum. Across the Tiber, Julia's petition lay sealed in a scroll dipped in consecrated oil, delivered by the trembling priestess under cover of night. its wax ceiling imprinted with the holy symbol of Juno Lucina. It alleged that Julia's health, sacred and protected by divine decree, was jeopardized by repeated calls to conception before the appropriate rites could be performed. It invoked ancient laws, lex Julia de maritandis or dinibus, and the unwritten decrees of any goddess who valued a mother's life above a husband's pride. The next morning, Rome's bureaucratic gears ground into motion. The scroll was referred to the prefect of the sacred flame, then to the College of Pontiffs, and finally to the Senate itself, each referral a ticking clock against Julia's womb. By midday, the entire Cornelian household sensed a shift. The usual bustle hushed into apprehension, slaves exchanging furtive glances at their mistress's empty chair. In the curia, Julia sat before a semicircle of robed patricians, her petition unrolled like a map to her future. Lucius stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes blazing. The flutter of togas sounded like wings of vultures. Senator Decimus Crispus, a known enemy of women's meddling, spat his disapproval. No law grants a matron the right to suspend motherhood. He gestured theatrically. What's next? Will they petition Vulcan to stop forging arms because a soldier's wife fears for his life? Julia held her ground, a voice steady even when her heart thundered. My petition is not for delay alone, but for sanctity. Shall Rome's matrons be cast aside like broken amphorae when they stand between life and death? She spoke of her physician's verdict, that childbirth in winter carried the specter of fever so lethal it could empty an entire household. She recounted how the earliest Roman mothers, kept alive by ritual baths and careful months of recovery, gave Rome its first leaders. Shall we erase their wisdom for the sake of a man's impatience? The Senate murmured. In that chamber of old men, none wanted to appear callous, and yet none wanted to look weak. One by one they debated, invoking ancestors draped in togas in honor. Finally, the Pontifex Maximus, a gaunt figure crowned with laurel, stood. He intoned the law. A wife's duty to bear children is matched by the state's duty to protect her life. He declared that until the Ides of October, Julia would be exempt from marital duty, and that any command otherwise was null and void under divine authority. That evening, Lucius returned to the domus, face pale as rushlight. He found Julia in the triclinium, surrounded by loyal women of the household, her sister, her mother's freedwoman, even a former rival from a neighboring clan. Their laughter was soft but fierce, tempered by relief. Julia raised a goblet of diluted wine and toasted to Juno and to every goddess who valued a mother's breath over a husband's whim. Lucius, unsure whether to scold or embrace her, collapsed onto the nearest Klein. You have bested me in public, he rasped, yet I feel no triumph. His admission, grudging as it was, broke through the last vestiges of his pride. Julia moved to sit beside him, hand resting on his shoulder. You have taught me much about power, she said quietly. Let me teach you about mercy. In the weeks that followed, the Cornelian household shifted. Lucius, chastened, took to escorting Julia to every public ceremony, announcing her sanctified status with a proud flourish. In the forum, women paused by the statue of Juno Lucina to whisper congratulations. Some even left small offerings of herbs. Lucius's political allies applauded his devotion, seeing in his capitulation a new avenue to flatter him in the Senate. But all was not serenity. Whispers of unyielding persisted. A cousin of Lucius, newly returned from Hispania, sniped that Julia's triumph would encourage wives to demand immunity for any whim, even neglect of husbandly duties. Others muttered about a new threat, women recognizing their rights and pressing them. Publius Cornelius, ever the pragmatist, cautioned his son. A matron's uprising would be more terrifying than any Gallic warband. Julia, aware that fleeting victories could be revoked, set about securing her legacy. She commissioned a small temple to Juno Lucina outside the city walls, funded not by her dowry, but by her olive estates. Its dedication ceremony was modest. 12 brides attended, veiled and weeping in union with the goddess. Julia delivered a speech that spread across Rome by whisper and scroll. Let every woman who walks the sacred path of marriage know that her life and her choice are as sacred as the hearth's flame. As autumn turned to winter, Julia's pregnancy progressed under the watchful eyes of Rome. She continued to host secret gatherings, drafting women into a silent network sworn to aid any matron wronged by marital tyranny. This conspiracy, one part charity, one part civil disobedience, provided illegal aid, hiding dowries from covetous in-laws, arranging safe passage to maternal sanctuaries, even forging petitions when no priestess could be bribed. When Julia went into labor in the depths of winter, the household braced for disaster. Storms battered the city walls, snow lay thick on the Capitoline. Yet the temple of Juno Lucina glowed with votive lamps, its doors guarded by women who had found their voices through Julia's cause. There, midwives trained in both medicine and magic delivered Julia's daughter in the small hours, amid chants and songs once forbidden to married women. The infant's first cry echoed through the temple like a bell. Outside, the storm broke, as if Juno herself had willed a moment's peace. Lucius stood at the threshold, tears mingling with beard, gazing at his wife and newborn with wonder. Publius Cornelius, summoned in secret, pressed gold into Julia's palm, not as dowry, but as seed for her fledgling temple. Rome itself seemed to breathe, acknowledging that within its empire of stone and steel, a woman's life and will could still command divine respect. In the hush before dawn, Julia held her daughter close and whispered a vow, that this child would inherit more than olive groves and rank. She would inherit the right to choose her own destiny. And though Rome's laws remained as unyielding as ever, Julia had proven that in the crucible of absurdity, the simple act of saying no could reshape empires from within. Can you hear the clank of chains being struck off ankles, the rustle of togas swept aside by determined feet, the hush that falls when the unthinkable becomes possible? By the time Julia's daughter, Cornelia, turned 7 winters old, the small temple to Juno Lucina had grown into a winding sanctuary of marble and tiled halls where women came not only to pray, but to plan. Each dawn, Julia wandered those corridors, once a trembling fetus, now a bright-eyed girl chasing silver doves along the portico, reminding her mother that survival was never merely private. It belonged to the breathless crowd, the silent committee of nurses and midwives, freed women and wives whose lives Julia had secretly bound together. Yet the change she ignited in Rome was not forged in idle piety. Rumors crept through the forum that Cornelia had been recognized as provincia legum, guardian of laws, a title unheard of for a female. Senators scoffed. What use was a guardian who could not wield a sword? Lucius, now praetor and destined for the consulship, caught wind of patrician gossip and pressed Julia to rein in her ambitions. He fretted that any spotlight on women's rights might dim his own official glory. She offered him public calm and private compromise, but her heart beat to a sterner drum. The laws of Rome could no longer rest solely on men's shoulders. While the Senate debated grain tariffs and frontier skirmishes, Julia's network prepared a subtler revolution. Mothers traded encrypted prayer scrolls sewn into pillows, each bearing a single clause from the Lex Julia de Adulteris Coruscendis, a law they intended to resurrect in defense of marital consent. Vestal priestesses smuggled these clauses into ritual readings so that women arriving at temple altars heard ancient words reminding them that forced obedience could be prosecuted as adultery against their husbands. The city's rumor mills churned. Matrons murmured of scandalous trials, of women who might demand divorce for coercion, the ultimate threat to Rome's social fabric. The first official crack appeared on the steps of the Basilica Aemilia. Julia, flanked by Cornelia and 24 matrons in austere tunics, submitted a joint petition to the Quaestor Urbanus. Let it be declared that any husband who compels his wife to bear a child against her health shall be deemed an adulterer, punishable by confiscation of property and exile. Clerk after clerk refused to docket the petition. "No such law exists," they sneered, "and if it did, what harm could force under a roof do that war did not?" Julia dipped her pen in disgust and moved on. She would present her case in person at the next public assembly. News of the petition spread like wildfire. Patrons at lavish banquets whispered of the matron's conspiracy, while young magistrates jostled for credit in condemning it. Yet in the slums of Trastevere, freed women stitched secret banners with the slogan Libertas Matrimoni and dangled them from garrets overlooking the Tiber. Smoke signals rose from rooftop fires. 3 puffs at dawn, 2 at dusk, code for trial at hand. Even Lucius's own sister, Antonia, pledged her dowry to support any matrons thrown into exile under Patria Potestas for joining the cause. The city buzzed. Was this genuine dissent or mere rumor? Another fruitless squall in Rome's tempestuous politics. On the Ides of March, as the Senate convened to discuss grain shipments to Gaul, an unprecedented spectacle erupted in the Roman Forum. Julia, veiled but unmistakable, climbed the rostra. A hush fell. The Forum's stones, worn by Cicero's oratory and Caesar's triumph, quivered at the sight of a woman claiming the center of power. She spoke not with tremulous restraint, but with the clear voice of a soldier addressing her cohort. For too long, Roman law has treated our bodies as property, our choices as privileges. I ask you now, conscripted citizens, to defend the freedom of the matron, of every woman who wakes at dawn under the yoke of duty she did not forge. The reaction was instantaneous. A chorus of offended murmurs from togas bright as peacock eyes echoed a swelling roar from the assembled crowd. Half cheering, half jeering. Senators rose, affronted by this breach of tradition. "A woman has no business on the rostra," they thundered. Yet Julia had anticipated their fury. At her signal, Cornelia released a flock of white doves, symbols of Juno's peace, over the marble columns. The birds circled, cooing, and the crowd parted, enchanted. In that moment, the absurd theater of Rome paused. A girl's laughter rang through marble halls as doves perched on patrician shoulders, shrugging their wings. Pandemonium erupted when a plumed centurion, sent by a miffed tribune, tried to drag Julia from the rostra. The matrons formed a human shield, their stolas twisting into brazen armor of defiance. The crowd surged. Freedmen and plebeians, long unused to such grand gestures, lined the steps chanting, "Libertas, Lex Julia." Senators paled, realizing the spectacle threatened to upend the entire social order. Rather than risk a bloodbath, the consul shut the assembly for the day, promising to consult legal precedent. Julia stepped down, her skirts stained with dust and triumph. Behind closed doors in the Curia, frantic debate ensued. Could a woman's petition truly carry weight? Learned jurists whispered that the Lex Julia's ancient wording might indeed classify forced conception as injuria, a grievous bodily injury offense. Realizing that ignoring the petition risked more upheaval than granting it, the Senate resolved to refer it to a special commission of pontiffs and jurists. Word spread. Rome had never witnessed a commission formed to decide a woman's bodily autonomy. While the commission gathered, Julia's network carried the banner of defiance into every corner of the city. In bathhouses, women read aloud testimony of wives who'd suffered deadly complications. In taverns, freed women raised mugs to "the day when no womb would be conquered by law." Gladiators tattooed slogans on their arms, an absurd sight of bearded men, with "no more chains" emblazoned on their biceps. Playwrights penned satirical skits mocking husbands who lost their togas chasing obstinate wives through the streets of Rome. The absurdity lay bare. Men who prided themselves on conquering the world could not conquer the will of a single woman. At last the commission convened at dawn within the temple of Saturn, its doors flanked by the remnants of the Republic's finest treasures. Julia entered, accompanied by Cornelia and the 24 matrons who'd never left her side. Across the sacred hall sat the pontiffs, faces grim behind fox fur cloaks, jurists clutching codices. Lucius stood among them, conflicted, his love for his wife warring with his dread of her power. Julia laid out her case, medical attestations, priestly testimonies, and most damning, the chorus of public support ringing from the Forum to the Circus Maximus. Discussion stretched through 3 days of incense smoke and whispered dissent. The pontiffs questioned technicalities. Did refusal equate to infamia? Could a forced pregnancy be considered violation of person? Jurists argued that the ancient 12 tables spoke of injury under Patria Potestas only in terms of debt, not bodies. But every argument met the same unwritten rejoinder. A free people must guard the freedom of its cultural bedrock, the home. On the dawn of the 4th day, the commission issued its verdict on a bronze tablet displayed before the temple's threshold. Henceforth, any husband who compels his lawful wife to conceive against her well-being shall be deemed guilty of inuria, matricida, punishable by exile from Rome and forfeiture of civic rights. Gasps echoed through the courtyard. Matrons wept, freed women cheered, even senators shuffled uncomfortably. Lucius, pale as marble, stepped forward and pronounced the verdict fit and lawful, lending his own hand to the document. The ripple effect was immediate. In the forum, heralds proclaimed the new law amid trumpets and clamoring crowds. Sales of olive oil lamps soared as women illuminated their homes to celebrate. Jurists began drafting manuals on marital consent, reprinting the 12 tables side by side with the new edict. Vestal virgins performed Thanksgiving rites, their chants now laced with hymns to sovereignty of the matron. The absurd paradox struck everyone. An empire built on conquest now consecrated a woman's refusal as law. Back in the Cornelian household, Julia surveyed the celebrations from her high balcony, Cornelia at her side. The city, once indifferent to her pleas, now carried her name on its lips. Yet she felt no triumph, only exhaustion and a wary anticipation of the backlash to come. Lucius approached, bowing his head in a way reserved for consular triumphs. Placing scrolls in Julia's hands, he murmured, "Your fight is now enshrined in law, but the real war begins in hearts and homes." Julia smiled, a wry, tired curve of her lips. She understood that laws carved in bronze could still rust in practice. Private vows could still molder in shadowed rooms. So long as any man believed a wife's body was his to command, Rome's struggle for true liberty would endure. Yet for now, she allowed herself a moment's rest, knowing she had reshaped the city's absurd mythology, one refusal at a time, into the foundation for a more humane empire. And as the sun set over the Palatine, painting the Tiber gold, Julia cradled Cornelia and whispered into the evening breeze, "May you never need a law to protect your choice, my child. But if you do, remember that it was forged by your mother's no." Did you ever imagine that a single no could shake the foundations of an empire? And yet here we are, watching Rome itself gasp for breath as it tries to swallow its own absurdity. By the time autumn winds rattled the shutters of every domus, the new law, Lex Julia de Voluntate Mariti, had spread through Rome like wildfire in brittle wood. In the Forum, bronze tablets proclaimed a husband's exile if he forced a wife to conceive against her health. Out in the provinces, magistrates scratched their heads over how to summon an angry paterfamilias to court for matricidal injury. It was a legal revolution so bizarre that even ambassadors from Parthia paused in their ambassadorial pomp, wondering if Rome had finally lost its collective mind or simply discovered a long-hidden shred of conscience. Yet, for Julia Cornelia, the architect of this upheaval, triumph felt hollow. She walked the marble halls of her family's villa, every footstep echoing with the ghosts of midnight petitions and robed assemblies. Around her, freed women brewed honeyed wine that tasted of victory, but left a bitter aftertaste, and midwives stitched banners of libertas matrimony into the seams of matrons' tunics. Everywhere she turned, women whispered of newfound courage, yet she knew that laws could be carved in stone and still crumble in practice. Lucius, now a freshly minted consul, tried to bridge the chasm between public accolade and private unease. He declared a month of festivals to honor Juno Lucina, presiding over feasts where wives reclined beside their husbands on equal benches, a tableau so unheard of that poets ran to their scrolls to capture the moment. Yet at every banquet, Julia caught the flicker of doubt in Lucius's eyes, the look of a man who realized that, for all his titles, his wife had become his superior in the one realm no consul could conquer, the sovereignty of her own body. In the heart of the city, the Vestal virgins, ever guardians of Rome's sacred flames, held a secret council. They recited ancient hymns and debated whether to inscribe Julia's petition among the temple's archives. Some argued that enshrining a secular law within Vesta's precincts would sully the goddess's purity. Others countered that if Rome's hearth was to survive, the laws must reflect the needs of those who stoked those fires, the women whose hands fed families and whose bodies bore heirs. In the end, they compromised. Julia's scroll would rest beside the sacred flame on the eve of the Ides, a silent testament to both divine will and mortal struggle. But not everyone celebrated. In the back alleys of Subura, where haggard slaves and boisterous artisans crowded dark taverns, talk turned savage. Some husbands, resenting the loss of their absolute authority, formed clandestine clubs masquerading as drinking societies. They called themselves the Fratres Stolae, brothers of the Stola. mocking the garment they deemed a symbol of unwanted empowerment. Their meetings ended in violence, Stola's hem harshly yanked, dowry chests rifled, tattoos of UJ, Ukshor Jubilata, wedding vow rebel, branded on forearms. Irony, it seemed, was in Rome's very blood. Julia responded not with swords, but strategy. She dispatched couriers to every senatorial household, delivering elegantly penned scrolls that recounted the law's first victories. A senator who tried to incarcerate his wife for refusal was himself fined and exiled. Another magistrate, accused of endangering his wife's life, publicly apologized and funded a new wing at the temple of Juno Lucina. Each anecdote was a blow struck for women everywhere, a reminder that the pen, however quill thin, could wound deeper than a gladius. Meanwhile, in distant Britannia, rumors of Rome's marital law reached the ears of tribal chieftains. They watched with fascination and horror. Romans, masters of siegecraft and roads, now drilling their own citizens on the etiquette of childbirth. Envoys sent back tales of matronly councils and bowl-bearing freedwomen, prompting Gallic tribes to send delegations to Olympia to study Roman law. Some curious, others eager to adopt the Lex Julia and curb the local strongmen's cruelty. The absurd spectacle of Rome exporting its marital safeguards became the talk of the western seas. Back in the capital, Julia's daughter Cornelia blossomed into a symbol as potent as any goddess. At 12 years old, she led a procession of girls behind the Capitol, carrying olive branches in silence, an act of solidarity for young women who would one day face the demands of marriage. Poets wrote odes to Cornelia the Bold, praising her dove-song voice and the steel in her gaze. Yet Julia watched her daughter with cautious pride, knowing that symbols, like snow on a rooftop, melt fast once the sun of real politics rises. It was around this time that a new crisis erupted. The festival of Floralia, a week of indulgence and license, descended into chaos as matrons, unaccustomed to unrestrained revelry, seized the chance to reenact their personal rebellions. Wine flowed, garments loosened, and processions became parades of irony. Women carrying placards that read, "Will refuse," marched before startled senators garbed in solemn togas. The city's moral guardians wailed, declaring that Floralia's very meanings had been perverted. Julius Fabius, pontiff of Flora, called an emergency fast, an act as futile as trying to stop the Tiber's current with a sandal. The climax arrived when Gaius Septimius, a notoriously misogynistic magistrate, challenged Julia to a public debate before the people. The challenge was accepted, and the rostra was cleared for what many thought would be an outright demolition. Women were still seen as unlearned in oratory, natural subjects of men's command. Yet Julia arrived with Cornelia at her side, flanked by a chorus of freed women draped in vintage stole from the Republican era, a deliberate nod to Rome's founding matriarchs. Gaius, in contrast, wore a borrowed toga so pristine it gleamed in the sun, a facade of immaculate authority. The debate opened with Gaius expounding on tradition. Rome is built on the sacrifice of individual will for the greater canvas of empire. What is marriage but the smallest empire? And what is a wife but a citizen whose first duty is to the state? He wielded ancient precedents like javelins. The crowd murmured approval. Then Julia rose, and silence fell so deep that the hustle of merchants and the footsteps of guards seemed distant echoes. She spoke of motherhood as partnership, not ownership, of law as a living organism that must adapt lest it wither, and of Rome's greatness being measured not by conquered lands but by the compassion it showed its weakest citizens. When she finished, Cornelia unclasped her dove brooch and released 2 birds into the sky. They circled the rostra, their white wings gleaming, a moment of thaumaturgy that transfixed the city. Gaius, unprepared for such theatrical subtlety, sputtered defenses that fell flat. Murmurs of approval swelled, and by the time Gaius slunk away, his reputation lay in ruins. Bards composed new verses celebrating Julia's eloquence. Even Gaius's own freedmen replaced his statue's inscriptions with satirical epigrams. Yet as victory bells rang, Julia knew that legal and rhetorical triumphs were only part of the battle. In private chambers across Rome, many wives still cowered in courtyards, fearful of husbands who smothered dissent with threats of disinheritance or patria potestas confinement. To address this, Julia sanctioned the formation of a collegium mulierum, a guild of women lawyers, midwives, and ritual specialists trained to defend petitions and guide terrified wives through the labyrinth of courts. The collegium opened its doors in a converted taberna off the Via Sacra, its sign a simple wreath of olive branches and a stola hanging from a nail. The collegium's first case was a tempest in a teacup. A merchant's wife from Ostia accused her husband of forcing her shipboard conception during a winter crossing. When she refused, he threatened to cut her out of his will. The collegium rallied support, marshaled testimonies from shipmates and healers, and presented a petition in Ostia's market square. The local praetor, fearing unrest among the seafaring guilds, sided with the wife. Word of this procedural victory reached Rome's Senate and reinforced the notion that the new law was more than a curiosity. It was a tool for real justice. Meanwhile, the Vestal Virgins, those austere guardians of the sacred flame, made a bold pronouncement. They would open the Temple of Vesta's archives to women petitioners twice a year, allowing female scribes to copy ancient laws and precedents. The Senate balked, arguing that no living woman could tread on Vesta's hearth, but the pontiffs interceded. To preserve Rome's sanctity, the law must be known to all whose lives it governed. This compromise tore down centuries of gender taboo, unleashing a torrent of codices and commentaries that feminized Rome's legal landscape. By the 25th year of Julia's struggle, the city had transformed. Public fountains bore inscriptions honoring Juno Lucina and Julia Cornelia in equal measure. Magistracies that once barred women now invited them as advisors to tribunals on family law. Statues of matron heroes, Cornelia, Livia, and now Julia, took their place alongside warlords in the Curia. Girls recited No as a hymn of personal sovereignty in the ludi for young citizens, and playwrights penned tragedies about husbands who mistook power for love, only to find both slipping through their grasp. Yet in the final reckoning, Julia understood that power was neither absolute nor permanent. On the eve of her daughter's wedding, Cornelia, now a poised young woman betrothed by choice, not coercion, Julia walked the halls of the temple she had built. Torchlight danced on marble friezes depicting Juno's myths, and the scent of incense carried whispers of past petitions. Kneeling before the statue, she offered a libation, not for herself, but for every woman whose no had fallen on deaf ears, whose choices remained constrained by custom, whose courage flickered but never died. As dawn broke over the Palatine, the last embers of Julia's life cooled like spent laurel leaves. She knew that empires outlast individuals, and that a single law, even one carved in bronze and blessed by priestesses, could be chipped away by apathy or ambition. But she also knew that Rome's absurd heart had learned to bleed for its women, that the word no had been consecrated as a right, and that in that consecration lay the seed of something greater than conquest, true community. When Julia passed away, her funeral cortege wound through streets lined with citizens in muted togas, clutched wreaths of olive and myrtle. Cornelia led the procession, her face as serene as a goddess's, carrying her mother's stola draped over her arm. At the temple of Juno Lucina, the Vestals lit the sacred flame one final time for Julia's passage. The Collegium Mulierum chanted hymns of liberty, their voices echoing off marble walls. In the hush, the cooing of doves from the rooftop reminded all that Julia's legacy was not a monument of stone, but the living breath of every woman who had found her voice. And so ends the final chapter, not with a hero's triumphant return, but with a mother's quiet exhalation, a testament that the greatest odyssey a woman can undertake is learning that her no can reshape worlds. In the heart of Rome, where power once meant silence, that single word now resonates like an eternal echo, a promise that freedom, absurd as it may seem in a land built on conquest, is nonetheless worth every breath.